Alright, what's up guys? Today we are doing a brand new Master Duel tier list. We have a ton of things that dropped in Master Duel. First of all, we've got a new battle pass, we've got a new ban list, and we've got a new pack. And also we've had some time to sort of solidify the existing metagame that we're in, so we have a little bit more accurate information on what the game is probably going to be like over the next few months. Honestly, Master Duel is kind of in a good place right now. Honestly, a lot of different decks are very, very relevant and very, very strong. The best deck in the game is actually not really that strong. It's just kind of a decent deck, so that's a lot of fun. When the best deck in the game is just okay and you can beat it with a lot of other rogue strategies, that's always a really fun thing about the game. It's not like the TCG where you're essentially just forced to play one of a handful of decks, but with this game you can actually play a large handful of decks and actually be somewhat successful with it. But let's not waste too much time. If there are any decks that I forgot, I included a ton of decks in this one. Follow this person right here. They made the deck, and this is Sir Large Gaming's Master Duel October 2022 tier list. So he has a YouTube channel that I've seen. I don't know if it's the same person that made this tier list, but go subscribe to him if that is the case. But let's not waste too much time. Let's get started. So right off the bat, we've got ABCs. ABCs are a little bit of an iffy one. So at the core, I think the deck is actually quite strong. It works very well with just all the various new supports with links. I'm sure you could, even if you really wanted to, create a branded version of this, just because at its core it is sort of like a contact fusion strategy. So you could theoretically make ABCs with invoked if you really want. Not invoked, I meant to say not invoked, with branded if you wanted to. So you could technically do that. So the problem with ABCs is that it's actually missing the Therions. The Therions are going to make this significantly better because it's going to give it an extra negate and just make the board a lot more consistent, and it's going to help machine decks overall in a lot of different ways. The other issue with this deck is, to this day, I still don't know why, ABC Buster Dragon is at 2. ABC Buster Dragon went to 1 in the OCG and the TCG because Master Rule 5 came out. So they decided to move this to 1 preemptively for no real reason. The deck never really did all that well, and Master Duel just has to suffer for previous sins. This is stuck, for some reason the boss monster is stuck at 2. I don't know if you would even really need to play 3, but I mean it's one of the better rogue decks that you could possibly play. You can even make the argument that it's a tier 3 deck. Next we've got adamancipators. I think this is a tier 3 deck. It makes really, really strong boards. But sometimes it can just, like, sometimes you summon a researcher, you activate a researcher, it gets ashed and your turn's over, or it gets imperm and your turn's over, or a lot of the time if they have some sort of like a gamma or some way to like get your monster off the board or get your normal summon off the board, it can really, really hurt. So if you like normal summon like a Kawaki Meru and they like compulsory evacuation device or Ice Dragon's Prison, just get that first monster off the board, you no longer control a rock, you don't control an adamancipator, and your opponent will just, you don't control anything that would allow you to special summon adamancipator, and then you just can't continue to board build. There's a few different kind of like weaknesses with that. Also, Nibiru is somewhat prevalent, although you can go into Baron de Fleur, lacking of course the easy access to Baron de Fleur is kind of a problem. Also, Crystron got hit, which was one of the real like play enablers in this deck. The fortunate thing is it does still have Block Dragon, but no Crystron. It's kind of a deck it's fallen off a little bit, but it's not like super weak. Next we've got, this is the Adventurer package. So if you don't already know, this got preemptively hit on the ban list. So it came out, when it came out, the Water Enchantress and the Rite of Aramesir were already at 2, and then Water Enchantress recently got hit again to 1. So technically the entire package right now is 1 Water Enchantress, 1 Foolish Burial to send Water Enchantress, and then you've got 2 copies of Rite of Aramesir. So you've got 4 combo starters, and then you've got 3 bricks, because you have the Adventure, Faithful Adventure, you've got the Fateful Adventure, the Draco back, and the Griffin Rider. You've got 3 bricks, and you've got 4 combo stars. I mean, that is like an all-time bad ratio. I mean, that is really, really, really bad. Most of the time you'll play something like, 3 combo starters and maybe 1 brick. Like, that is at best. And sometimes the combo starters play, like, you can search the combo starter and then you'll play 1 brick. The brick to combo starter ratio is horrific. The only deck that I think can really even afford to play this anymore is probably maybe like Phantom Knights and maybe Praying Kids. Outside of that, like, you almost want to avoid this engine. And as far as playing this engine at pure, like, we're talking a pure adventure deck, I don't think that was ever even a choice. Konami never allowed that to happen because right off the bat, like I said, they came out semi-limited. So playing this deck pure is it wasn't happening. Yeah, basically I would avoid this as a pure deck for sure. As an engine, I think it's kind of like in Rogue tier. It's okay. But as a pure deck, I don't think you should be playing this. Next is Nordics. Nordics with Adventure, like full power Adventure, is actually a pretty decent deck. It topped some regionals in the TCG. It didn't get quite as good of... It wasn't quite as good, like I said, in Master Duel, only because in Master, like I said, the adventure engine kind of came out already sort of hit, and on top of that, the adventure, like that entire metagame, like a few months ago, was extremely, like, horrific. If you went second, you basically lost. So this never really got a huge chance to shine. I'd say it's probably a consider building something else sort of deck. You could argue it's in Rogue, but again, it really depends on where the adventurer package is. I would say probably consider building something else is where this deck should be. Aliens is definitely a consider building something else. This isn't a particularly bad deck. It's a vampire, not a vampire. It's a reptile based strategy that works by putting counters on your opponent's monsters, and then if they have alien counters, you can do a variety of different things. It was a cool concept at the time, but it's just very, very slow. And it's got a pretty decent link monster, like most link monsters that try to help decks. They're pretty decent. Honestly, I think other reptiles strategies are just better. I think Mutants is just better, and I think Ogdoadic is just better. So if you're really into reptiles, I think that's the direction you should go. Altergeist is probably like a tier 3 deck. You would think that it would perform a lot better, but there's something about Master Duel that just it doesn't seem like this deck seems to be as performing as well as other decks are. I think, well, number one, it's a trap deck, so automatically trap decks have a disadvantage in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because if you lose that dice roll, you have to go second and you have to set all your stuff. And the only trap deck that can really benefit from going second is usually Eldlich, because they don't need their normal summon. They literally play like 37 trap cards and then 3 monsters. Most of the time it's actually 2 copies of Eldlich and 2 monsters, so they can just afford to just, okay, you set up this huge board, set 5 pass, and they don't have to like split their activations between 2 turns. Whereas with this, you actually do have to split your activations between 2 turns, so you have to like normal summon, Mel you seek, attack directly, trigger that effect, send a card, then you have to link that away, search multi-faker. Like, you still have to go through some of the combo lines with this deck. It's a little more complex to go second with this than it is with Eldlich. And Eldlich is just generally a better trap deck. This does have some benefits, so you can play things like Secret Village. But again, Secret Village is one of those cards, when you're going first, it's fantastic. It's a win more card. When you're going second against Secret Village, it literally, it does nothing. Because unless your opponent plays like, I don't know, unless your opponent's playing Runic, it's a little rough to even play it. And even then, they could just chain it to the activation of Secret Village. So that's where I'm at on this. Also, Red Reboot went to 2, although it's not like a lot of people are really main decking Red Reboot. It's not like it's just like taken off. Red Reboot is kind of like a card you see iffy every once in a while. Next is Ancient Gears. I think Ancient Gears is definitely a consider building something else. The problem with this deck is, again, you're going second in Master Duel, which is already, you've got a structural disadvantage to going second because your opponent's setting up some kind of a board. But in a deck like this, theoretically, it would be okay because your deck is built to go second, so it can actually benefit you because your opponent will always want to go first whenever they win a coin flip, and you will always want to go second. So even if you win or lose a coin flip, you're always going second, and you always, the thing that you want is always basically happening. The problem is, this is a going second deck that requires a lot of special summons. And the problem with that is, yeah, it requires a lot of special summons, and it OTKs that turn. So you can't like just, oh, I'm just going to Dark Ruler. You need to attack. You need to inflict damage. You need to win that turn. You're activating Power Bond. You're trying to win. You're not trying to win over 4 turns. This is not a control deck. This is not a deck you're going to win on turn 9. Like, you're trying to win that turn. The other issue is Max C is a problem with this deck because you're special summoning multiple times in that turn, and it's very, very resource intensive. You cannot afford to give your opponent up. Give your opponent a lot of cards, because again, if you don't OTK, you basically lose with this deck. Some of their main starters and some of their main fusion monsters are like the I forget the name of the dog exactly, but there's the Hound. The Hound allows you to fusion summon using resources from your hand and from your field, and it's basically like a contact fusion. But if they imperm that, just nothing happens. Some of its better monsters is like Ancient Gear Chaos Giant. That's the one that's unaffected by spells, unaffected by traps, attacks all monsters, does piercing. Like, that card is so strong, and the problem is it's not unaffected by monster effects, which is the most prevalent form of destruction in the game. So that's already like kind of idiotic. And then second of all, it requires 4 monsters to make, which is, again, it's very, very resource intensive. You have to pour 4 resources into 1 monster. It's not unaffected by monsters. So literally, you can just summon that, and then they can just like target destroy with anything. Any of their like monster disruptions can get rid of a monster you pour 4 resources into. Ancient Gear Fusion is just kind of a lackluster card. You're forced to have Ancient Gear Golem on the field if you actually want to send materials from the deck. So if you want the good part of Ancient Gear Fusion, you must have the monster that you cannot special summon on your field. Again, kind of an issue. The only thing that can summon it is the Catapult, which ignores summoning conditions. There's so many issues with this deck, and it's why I would recommend, when I say consider building something else, the thing that I would consider building is probably Earth Machines. It's a better deck, and it can go first or second, or Trains. Either one of those things. You want to OTK and be more consistent at Trains. If you want to play Earth Machines, you just play, like I said, Earth Machines. Next, we've got this is the Ancient Warriors. This is actually a half decent like rogue going second deck. You can definitely steal a lot of games with this. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but you can basically get to Diamond tier 1 with anything like rogue and above. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to get to it, but it's just the tier 1 decks are going to make it easier, and the lower you go, the more difficult it is to get to Diamond tier 1. I'm not saying that you can't get to Diamond tier 1 with any of these decks. It's just going to be more difficult the more down you go. So this is, again, a pure going second deck. Requires a lot of special summons. You're special summoning into Max C, which means your opponent already set up a board. You're trying to break that board while they're gaining resources, and they're gaining additional resources off the Max C. It's a tough break for this deck, because you actually do have to special summon so many times, but it really can break boards very easily. Double Dragon Lords is a very strong card. It bounces. It's one of your only like going first plays. But overall, I think the deck is quite a strong rogue deck. I don't think it's quite as strong as ABCs though. Next is this is Aqua Actresses. This is probably an avoid at all costs. This deck has like no support. It's got 3 main deck monsters. It's got 3 continuous spells and 1 trap card. That is the entire archetype. It's like nothing. And the effects aren't that bad. They've got the spells give you a bunch of like protection, and then the monsters have a bunch of soft ones per turns, which are kind of cool. Arowana is the card right here. I think this lets you like special summon a monster from your hand. Tetra lets you search. The other one lets you special summon a monster, but they all have like decent effects. The only issue with this deck is just literally it's got like no cards. The best thing you can do really is just do a like Totally Awesome Turbo, and Totally Awesome's at 1. So it's tough. Next we've got, this is Branded Despia. This is the best deck in the game. It's the best deck in the game, but I swear to you, it's not like that broken of a deck. The meta is just so like, it's so soft right now. Like, it's not a really, really like aggressive meta where you've got this tier 1 deck that's like super annoying, so difficult to beat. Here's what this deck has going for it. So number 1, this deck has a lot of recursion. It has a lot of starters, and it has what you would call kind of like, it has a lot of gas. So you activate polymerization. If that polymerization resolves, for example, you resolve that polymerization, you're going to have a graveyard effect off the tragedy. You're going to have a graveyard effect off probably whatever other material that you're going to use. And then you're going to have another effect off of the monster that you actually successfully fusion summon to get you to a Mirror Jade. So it's just got a lot of gas. Second of all, this deck is actually really, really good at dealing with floodgates. and dealing with like floodgates, dealing with maxi, dealing with stuff like that. It's really, really strong against floodgates. Like Macrocosmos really doesn't do anything against this deck because Macrocosmos D-shift there, if your monster gets banished, you still get to resolve its effects. It's one of the real cool parts about this deck. Like most decks, if it says if this card is sent to the graveyard, if this card is removed from the field and sent to the graveyard, you can, this. But this card, this entire archetype says if this card is removed from the field or sent to the graveyard or banished, then you can do this. So either way, if your cards get banished, if they get sent to the graveyard, you're basically resolving it. This deck actually has a very, very fair matchup against Floowandereeze. Like whenever I play this, I never feel like I'm being like when I see a Floowandereeze like start setting up their board, I'm not like sitting there like pulling my hair out dramatically, because this deck actually has a decent matchup. D-shifter isn't like the end of the world. Like, yeah, you'd rather not get D-shifter, but if you do get D-shifter, it's not the end of the world. The other thing is there can only be one is really not that strong against this deck because you have a lot of different types. Goes in match is really not that strong. Most of your deck is dark. You have a few light monsters, but the majority of your deck is actually dark, so it's not really the end of the world. Skill drain is really not the end of the world because Mirror Jade, for example, sends for cost. You can still send Albion and still get to search. In the end phase, you have a ton of graveyard effects. All of your monsters are actually really strong, so it's like, cool, skill drain me. I'll just summon like 3 monsters with 3,000 attack, and I'll still win. Like, I don't care if you skill drain me. Like, the deck is really strong. It's really resilient. It's good against a lot of the kind of unfair parts of the game, which is why I think it's probably the best deck in the game. It just has a really fair matchup against a lot of different decks. You never feel like you're actually like ever getting cheated. And again, at the same time, it's not like a meta deck where it's super oppressive. Like your best board is usually like a Mirror Jade, a Hand Trap, and maybe a card like a Call by the Grave face down. That is like one of your better openings. That's not, and the thing is, the deck just kind of gains resources over time, and that's why it's so good. It's not like a super oppressive deck. It's not like Drytron when it had an endless amount of negates. It's not like the Tenyi Crystron Needle Fiber, that entire like saga where if you went second you couldn't play. Like, this deck is really, really fair to play against. It's just very, very consistent and resilient, and it is the best deck in the game. Next we've got, this is the End of the World FTK. This basically skips your opponent's turn. You play it with Dangers, and you play it with Dangers and Dark Worlds, but it's like an Arcana, skip your opponent's turn, FTK. So this deck, if you're playing like the Danger Dark World version, it's probably like somewhere and consider building something else. Honestly, the deck is pretty crappy going second. Force, if you're consider just playing it pure, I would avoid it at all costs. Arcana Force is really not a good deck. It's all about coin flipping. It's just a horrific deck. I wouldn't even consider playing something else. I literally just don't play it. Your life is better that way. Next is Aromatherapy. Aromatherapy is a deck based on, I think it's going to consider building something else. I don't think it's a bad deck. Don't get me wrong. Again, I'll give you an alternative to this deck because I don't think it's a bad deck. Aromatherapy is not a bad deck. It is a deck that is, it gives you additional effects when your life points are higher than your opponent's life points. Now, typically in old school Yu-Gi-Oh, that was almost like it was a given. Like, your opponent, you were always going to have higher life points than your opponent. Your opponent was going to activate an Upstart Goblin, you're going to gain life points. Your opponent was going to activate Solemn Strike, Solemn Judgment, Solemn Warning, you're going to gain life. Like, they're going to have lower life points than you are. This deck, it was almost guaranteed that you were going to have more life points than your opponent, particularly if you were going second against your opponent, because at some point they would activate something that would reduce the life points. Or increase your life points or reduce their own life points. So that was almost a given. The problem with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, in order for Tier 1 decks to compete, Konami has realized that they need to print cards that inflict life points to their opponent, or that increase their own life points because of time rules in the TCG. And because that is the sector of the game that designs the cards, it trickles into Master Duel. So now we have decks that randomly will like burn or gain life points, and because the life points of your opponent will always be higher than yours in the Tier 1 strategies, it's made this deck a lot less playable. So for example, with the best deck in the game, which is the Despia branded Despia, you have, for example, Masquerade. Every time you activate a card, you have to pay 600 life points. The second that resolves once, half the effects of the aromatherapies just become just not as good. Like half the deck becomes unplayable. It just makes the deck so much worse. Then you've got, for example, Floowandereeze. I can't find them right now, but their search spell, for some reason, just out of nowhere, gain 500 life points. Why? I don't know, but it makes this deck less playable. You've got Sky Strikers. They attack directly. You're down 1500 life points. All of a sudden, this is significantly less playable. You've got some other tier 1 decks that do that too. I had like a list in my head of other tier 1 decks. Maybe I'll say it when I remember it. But a lot of them just like randomly will burn you. Oh yeah, the other best deck in the game, swordsoul, randomly 1200 life points, just burn your opponent for 1200. Why? Unexplained, but just burn your opponent for 1200, and it makes this deck so much less playable. But you can actually play like a Sun Avalon combination plant deck. So if you really want to play a plant deck, you can play Sun Avalons and then play some of the other like good just plant support that has come out over the years, and you can actually mix it with some, like for example, you play Aromatherapy Jasmine in that deck, but you just can't play it as a pure deck just because of the state of the game right now. Again, it's nobody's fault. I wish those cards weren't in the game. I think it's dumb that you randomly can burn your opponent or gain life points for no real explanation, no real reason. It's literally just made to make tier 1 decks win in the TCG and the OCG, and it triggers into Master Rule and makes decks like this sort of unplayable. And it sucks because this is actually a really cool mechanic, but I would consider building something else like the other plant decks. Next, we've got Artifacts. I think Artifact is definitely building something else. I mean, I guess you play it as an engine, but again, Phoenix Enforcer is pretty hit on this ban list at this point. We've got one Fusion Destiny, we've got Celestials banned, so I mean, I guess you could play it, set it, and then Artifact, and I guess you could do that, but I don't think it's that great. Same thing with this is Artifact Durandal. I don't know why. This is, I guess, pure Artifacts. Pure Artifacts, again, I don't think is that strong of a deck. I would definitely consider building something else. I don't have anything really comparable to it. It's a deck based around your opponent popping your spawn trap cards, you popping your own spawn trap cards, and then you gaining additional effects. I think that it's just kind of okay. Some of the cards are pretty good. So, like, you've got Artifact Lancia, Artifact Scythe. They're, like, decent cards, but I, generally speaking, wouldn't recommend playing these as a pure archetype. Battle Wasps. I'm going to assume this is like Battle Wasps and Bee Troopers, because Battle Wasps always play Bee Troopers always play Battle Wasps. Like, it might as well be one archetype at this point. I think it's a tier 3 deck. It's a decent combo deck. It has non-linear lines of play. I have an old combo video on my channel. I don't even know if it would even be relevant because the ban lists are so different. It was a TCG video. But yeah, you can do a lot of cool things with this deck. You can mix the trap tricks in there. You can end on a Cicada King. There's a lot of different things that you can do in that deck. Scary Moth. You can do all types of different cool things. So I think the deck is definitely like a tier 3 deck. It's not a deck you see very often, but it's something you see once in a while. Battling Boxers is definitely like a consider building something else. They're just better XE decks out there. I would definitely build something else. It's not the worst deck ever, but you could definitely substitute this with something else. It's definitely a very like low tier deck. It's got like weird like old school like protection effects. It's a battle phase deck. Yeah, it's a weird deck. Next we've got Boss Rush. This is definitely like an avoid sort of deck. This entire archetype has 2 good cards. It's got a field spell that's actually quite decent, and then it's got a field spell that's decent, and it's got a one new monster that came out somewhat recently. I don't remember how many sets ago, but it came out somewhat recently that special summons itself. It's got like 2,500 attacks. It's like a level 9 monster. It's a decent card. But other than those 2 cards, the entire archetype it sucks, and it literally just like fights against its own like. It fights against what it tries to do. Like this card, for example, Boss Rush. The first like sentence of the card is you cannot normal summon or set cards. Like, that is a continuous effect on this continuous card. You can't do that. You cannot normal summon or set, but it lets you special summon a monster from your deck every end phase, a boss monster, a boss rush monster. Here's the problem. The monsters gain counters only when they're normal summoned. And if you don't normal summon, they can't gain counters. That just is so bad. And if they don't have counters, they don't get special abilities, additional abilities like popping spawn trap cards. And if they get attacked and they have no counters, they get automatically destroyed. So that is rough. Like the main spell of the deck works against the entire mechanic of the entire deck. This deck is, again, it has 2 cards that are made in the modern era and 2 cards that are like really, and the majority of the archetype is old and a really small archetype in general, and the cards are just really not that strong, unfortunately. This is Rose Dragons. I think Rose Dragons, again, there's kind of like a weird like plant deck where it's a plant deck and some of them are dragons, some of them are plants. It's kind of like iffy in the middle. But I think this is definitely a consider building something else. Pure, this deck is actually kind of tough to play. Crystron really mattered for the Rose Dragons, and once Crystron was gone, the Rose Dragons just kind of fell off. It was a pretty strong deck for a while. 10 Ys with the Rose Dragons. You summon the 10 Yi, level 7. You normal summon the Rose Dragon, level 3. Make a Baron de Fleur. Now your opponent is locked out of like Nibiruing you or hand trapping you for the rest of the turn, and then you can go into like Crystron and other stuff. But with Crystron gone, there's not as much of an incentive to play the Rose Dragons. But I do think it's generally a pretty decent deck. Next, we've got Blackwings. Blackwings are definitely a rogue deck. We've got Full Armor Master. They're getting more support in... They got more support in the TCG, but they're getting more support in... I don't know how many sets. Because we're talking about... In Master Duel, they drop like 3 archetypes every few months, whereas in the TCG, they just drop sets. And sometimes those sets will have so many different archetypes, so many different cards. We might get this in 7 months to a year in terms of the new support, but as it stands, the deck is actually not that bad. You can mix it with Raid Raptors, you can mix it with the Raid Raptors or Phantom Knights, and the deck is actually quite strong. Yeah, it just depends on how you mix it, how you play it. You play a limited kind of like Blackwing board, but for the most part, you're going to be playing mostly like Raid Raptors and Phantom Knights, but you can do some really cool combo things. Also, you have like the Simorgh, the Dark Simorgh bird, which is quite decent. I don't know, I'm not 100% sure if it's come out in Master Duel, because again, it could have been released more recently, so I might be misremembering. But overall, I played against this deck in ladder a few times. It's actually quite good. Next is Blue Eyes. I'm going to consider this. This is Blue Eyes, but it has Chaos Max Dragon on it. Chaos Max Dragon I don't think is the best strategy, but I think Blue Eyes is actually a decent strategy. You can play Blue Eyes with... for example, Branded. You can play a Trap Blue Eyes deck. You can play a variety of different Blue Eyes decks that are actually quite decent. The problem with Blue Eyes is that Crystron got hit, and with Crystron gone, it's kind of tough to play Blue Eyes, like a combo version of Blue Eyes, just because without Crystron, it's very difficult to combo off and do all of the various cool things that you can. Whereas before, Crystron might as well have been a Blue Eyes card. It helped you get to Baron de Fleur. It helped you put the stones in the graveyard. Like, it helped you stack so much advantage. But with that gone, you literally have to play like a trap build. If you want to see a build, there is a build on the channel. But again, it's either Branded Blue Eyes or Trap Blue Eyes. Those are really your only 2 options. Bujinki is an XYZ deck that I think is just okay. I think there's definitely just so many better XYZ decks to play, or XC decks. Right off the bat, probably the better XYZ deck that I can think of is probably Phantom Knights. Just they go into XCs so much more easily than this. Utopia is a better deck than this. There's just so many that are just better, and again, this is one of those decks that I would consider building something better. This is Burning Abyss. I'm going to count this as kind of like a trap stun Burning Abyss, where you play a bunch of traps and then just, the Burning Abyss cards. You place things like floating traps, like Lost Winds, stuff like that, and you accumulate resources like that. The King Jack guy. That deck I think is like a tier 3 deck. It's not the most like explosive deck ever. It has a very bad matchup to like Floowandereeze, for example. But I think tier 3 is probably like a fair place to put it. Next is Buster Blader. Again, Buster Blader is a pretty decent deck. There's the coolest like Buster Blader deck that you could possibly play is probably like a Dogmatica Buster Blader deck. I've seen that, and I used to play that probably like a year ago. I used to try to play that. That deck was kind of nice. One issue on in Master Duel is that for some reason Endear Servant is limited to 1. Again, it's one of those things where like Master Duel is paying for the sins of previous formats that had nothing to do with Master Duel. So there are cards that are like limited and banned based on things that were limited and banned in the OCG 5 years ago. It has nothing to do with Master Duel, but they're kind of just paying for it. I think it's probably like a rogue deck. It has a little trouble going seconds. The whole point is to turn your opponent's monsters into dragons, and then you have Buster Dragon, or I'm sorry, you have the Destruction Sword guy to change them to defense mode and negate their effects. So you have Buster Dragon to change them into dragons, and this changes them in defense and negates their effects. So it's cool. It's like a skill drain slash level limit area B. So they can't attack over anything. It's a cool lockdown that you can do, but if you're going second, it's like, what is that lockdown really going to accomplish? So that's where that is. Chain Burn, I think, is definitely like a rogue deck. This deck, sometimes you just straight up, it's a best of one format. Sometimes you are not ready for it. You are literally not ready for it. Listen, I'll admit, I have a pretty good win rate in Master Duel. I probably have like a 65-70% win rate, somewhere around there, which is actually quite high, because you only really have to have a 51% win rate to get to platinum, or to get to diamond tier 1. You only have to have a 51% win rate. But this deck catches me off guard every once in a while, and I do lose these, because it's like, dude, if they go first and they set 5 traps and they just start activating like Secret Barrel and like all of these trap cards that burn you and burn you and burn you, there's nothing that you can really do. Like, you can't side deck. You didn't draw the Harpy's Feather Duster. You didn't draw the Lightning Storm. You just lose. Like, there's nothing you can do. You either lose or don't. They're going to burn you to death, and there's nothing that you can do. And sometimes this deck just will literally just win games against you, and there's nothing you can do. Next is, this is the Phantasmal Lords, which are also known as the Sacred Beasts. This deck, I think, is another deck that's kind of like a rogue deck. It's one of those decks, again, it just catches you off guard. If this deck goes first and it sets up, that field spell is bananas. Have you ever read that? If you haven't read that field spell, pause this video and go look up Fallen Paradise, which is the field spell for this deck. It is insane. You can't target the Sacred Beasts. You can't destroy the Sacred Beasts. And every single turn you can draw 2 cards if you control a Sacred Beast. It is insane. That field spell is crazy. It's one of my favorite parts about the deck. Also, the deck has some really good combo starters. All of the little fiend monsters, it gives you an extra. One of them gives you an extra normal summon, and on top of that, it searches. The other one you contribute to summon from your hand. The level 5 you can banish from your graveyard to summon from your deck, ignoring summoning conditions. Like, this stuff is really, really strong and really scary. Like, you never actually have to legitimately summon any of the Sacred Beasts the way you're supposed to. You literally don't even have to. The Hamon card, which is the Hamon spell, is also a crazy card. It's one of the only spell cards. It's one of the only ways in a Yu-Gi-Oh that you can negate Super Poly, because it's a continuous effect that can negate. It's insane. Like, there are a lot of components to this deck that are really, really strong. Again, it's just one of those things that it has a little bit of a tough time going second, because your combo starters aren't just regular monsters. If you get like skill drained on one of your summons, this duel's basically over. Has a really rough time going second sometimes. Going first, if this deck sets up, it's tough to play around. This is a deck I really, just from a design standpoint, don't like. This is the Familiar Possessed Monsters. It literally is like, it is Secret Village Turbo, it might as well be called. You basically summon the Familiar Possessed, like girls. Then you use like the traps. If one gets destroyed, you float into another one. Like Unpossessed, stuff like that. Some of the other spell card, the continuous in archetype spell card, when you normal summon a Familiar Possessed monster, you get to draw a card. Like, they've got decent cards, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, the deck is actually like really weak, because their monsters literally don't do anything. They don't do anything. It might as well, I think they would have been better, and I've said this a lot of times, they would have been better if they were a normal monster, because at least if they were a normal monster, you could use a lot of the just classic normal monster support, like Unexpected Die, and just various, like I said, various normal support that has been created all throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! But unfortunately, they are effect monsters that might as well have no effects whatsoever. I wouldn't say, I want to say avoid at all costs. The deck can win just by sitting on a bunch of floodgates, because again, the monsters don't do anything, so you literally can just like summon all the monsters, activate Skill Drain, activate Macrocosmos. You literally could just sit on a bunch of floodgates if you want to, and then use the kind of inarctic spells and traps to gain advantage. But again, it's just, I would avoid this deck at all costs, but it's technically better than all of the decks that I placed down here, so I'm not going to do that. Chronomaly is an XYZ deck. I think there are a lot of XC decks that are just better than Chronomaly. I think it's just kind of like a decent, like near the bottom, not like bottom tier, but like slightly below mid tier XC deck. I don't think it's that good. Cloudian is another deck I'd say I'd probably avoid Cloudians. It's really not that strong. It had its a little bit of a chance to be decent in Exceed era, not in Exceed era, in GX era. It had a decent chance, but again, it's just too weak of a deck. It's a deck that hasn't gotten support in a very, very long time, and it's definitely a deck that needs support because its cards are not that strong. Next, we've got the Mech Knights. Mech Knights are either, I want to say, like Rogue or Tier 3. Mech Knight Invoked is probably like a Tier 3 deck. Like, it's not destroying tournaments, but I'll probably put it in Rogue. Because honestly, last time I think I put too many cards, too many decks up here, which I don't think was a fair thing. But this is one of the better Rogue decks that you can play. Again, it's a going second deck. It's a blind second deck. Your opponent can't side deck, and they can't play around the fact that you're going to play into, like, no one really plays around columns in Master Duel. That's number one. Number two, your opponent's not going to, like, side deck and then afterwards know, like, okay, this guy's playing Mech Knight, so I'm going to make him go first, and I'm never going to place two cards in the same column. Your opponent's never going to know to do that because it's the best of one format and you're going second. So there's no way for them to do that. That is a structural advantage that this deck has. But this suffers from the same thing that all going second decks in Master Duel suffer from, which is it's a going second deck that special summons, and it's a going second deck in general. So you're playing through a bunch of interruptions, negates, stuff like that. In general, the best deck again is the branded Despia, and this deck is really doesn't matter. Like, this going second decks are not great against this deck because this deck floats a lot. So in previous metas, if you broke your opponent's board, you basically won. If you break this board, they have so many like recursive graveyard effects that it really doesn't matter. They're just going to keep summoning new stuff. So that's kind of why this is kind of like higher Rogue. This is like the Cyber Dragon deck. You see this again every once in a while. Once they summon this boss monster out, it's case closed. The game's over. But getting to that boss monster can be a little bit of a struggle. But yeah, once they summon it, it's like unaffected by everything. Once that thing hits the field, you're done. Your best bet is either a kaiju or a goddess, with the goddess that summons itself from the extra deck. But I'd say this is probably like a Rogue deck. Cyber Dragon is another Rogue deck. I actually probably think Cyber Dragon Pure is probably better than the Cyber Dark. I would prefer just to play it again by itself. Some of these Cyber Dark cards are really, really strong, but again, I think that a pure Cyber Dragon deck, blind second, is probably better than Cyber Darks. This, I'm going to say, this is Access Code Talker. I'm going to say this is Code Talkers. Putting Code Talkers somewhere in like Rogue. It's a decent deck. Heat Soul is in the game, so that makes the deck significantly better. Yeah, I'd say it's probably like somewhere around the Rogue deck. It's a good deck. Not outrageously good, but just like a good deck. There is a better deck that you can play that is a Cybers deck, which would be the Salamangrates. But again, if you really, really like Code Talkers and you watched Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns and you had a great time, it's not, you're not going to go wrong by playing Code Talkers. Dangers are probably like a Rogue deck. I'd say like Danger Dark World, probably somewhere around Rogue. It's good going second. It's good at OTKing. It's good at going first. It can set up a board. It's just if you this is one of those rare decks where if your opponent maxes you can just deck them out, which is really cool. Like, it's one of the rare cases where it's like you want to get maxed. Because you can just keep special summoning, so long as they don't have a Nibiru, of course. You can keep special summoning and then just beat your opponent that way. Next is Dark Lord. I'd say Dark Lord is somewhere around like Rogue tier. Honestly, Dark Lord is probably, you're more likely to see this dude summoned in Despia than you are to actually see it summoned in Dark Lord, which is a sad thing to hear. You almost never see the deck. The biggest problem with the deck is it is a brick fest. Every monster is like level 5,000, and the deck has like one normal summon. It's Ukobek, and yeah, that's kind of the issue with the deck. It's just every monster is like 3 million levels too high. Next is Dark Magician. Dark Magician is definitely a Rogue deck. Is it better than Blue Eyes? Is it worse than Blue Eyes? Well, I mean, they didn't lose Crystron, but at the same time, they didn't get their new support. So they're stuck in sort of a purgatory where they don't have their new cards, but at the same time, they're kind of a decent deck because Master Duel is actually quite hospitable for Dark Magician. So one thing that's good about Master Duel is that Yeah, it's just they have a lot of draw cards like Upstart Goblin, Into the Void, Chicken Game, which are really good because you can stack at the top of your deck in Dark Magician with Soul Servant. You stack at the top of your deck, you activate whatever draw card +1 draw card that you need to activate, and you draw whatever you want to draw. It's actually quite nice. And they don't have that in the TCG. In the OCG they have that, but the OCG's like a whole nother story because Dragoon's banned. Also, I mean, it's really kind of frustrating what Master Duel is doing to this deck. Number one, the Dark Magician support just refuses to come over. I'm not really sure why, but they just refuse to release it. They could have released it in this set. I mean, there's Pendulum Magicians in this set. You could have just put the other magicians in this set, but they, like, Scareclaw was such a out of left field archetype to release in this set. They should have released Dark Magician, Pendulums, and the last one was Valiant. So you had basically 3 spellcaster archetypes all in one set. Everyone would have been like, all right, that makes sense. But Scareclaws were kind of like out of left field. This definitely should have, the support should have been released. Also, I will say this other thing, Dragoon should really be in the game. Just because, I mean, like, Phoenix Enforcers are already better than Dragoon, and almost no one plays that. Even, like, when as soon as those materials got hit, it, like, disappeared. I think they should just ban Verde Anaconda and put Dragoon in this game, and then Dark Magician can actually be able to, like, maybe be up here or somewhere. Actually be playable. Next is Dark World. I'm going to put this exactly where I put Danger. I think these decks are quite similar. Danger, Dark World. I think if you're playing Dark World, you're playing Danger. If you're playing Danger, you're playing Dark World. This is getting new support in a few months. This is getting new support in a few months in the TCG. I have no idea when this is getting new support in Master Duel. Maybe in like a year. I don't know. DDDs is a tier 3 deck that ends on a Nibiru token. Unfortunately, it has a rough time playing against Nibiru, but as long as you don't get Nibiru'd or Maxed, you're going to be in a good place. But I think it's probably like somewhere up here. It's one of the better combo decks. It's probably like on par with Adamancipator. It's a very like skill intensive pendulum deck. It's one of the pendulum decks that I really like, respect, and like. This is Despia. I don't know why this is a repeat. I'm not even gonna grade this because no one's gonna play pure Despia. I'm just gonna use that for like Scareclaws or something at the end. Next is Destiny Heroes. We're just going to call this Heroes. I think Heroes is a tier 3 deck. Yeah, Heroes is like I said, tier 3 deck. Again, the problem with Heroes is if your opponent has Nibiru, you essentially just lose. This deck has nothing to combat Nibiru. Like, literally nothing to combat Nibiru. And then you've got Crossout Designator, it's limited to 1. You have 1 Crossout Designator. If you don't draw it and your opponent has Nibiru, you simply lose. Like, you have nothing to do. There's nothing you can do about it. If they have it, you lose. You lose your Phoenix Enforcer. You lose your I randomly forgot the guy that you use the Dark Fusion to go into. You lose your Absolute Zero. You lose Dark Law. You lose everybody. You just lose everything you have. You lose Plasma. There's literally nothing in this archetype that prevents Nibiru. It's bizarre. It really is. One thing that you can do is you can play Dark Angel and put on your opponent's board, which beats Despia technically, because Dark Angel, if your opponent activates a spell, it forces them to negate that spell. Like, if you put the monster on their board, it forces them to negate that spell. So that is really positive. That has a really good matchup with Despia. But if you're not playing Despia, then, like, what is that really doing? It's negating 1 spell. Next is Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs always like around tier 3. The way I like to play it is going second. Some people play like the combo version. I think the combo version is a lot more breaky. I like the going second version a lot better. This deck is outrageously expensive. Like Fossil Dig is URs, so many URs. But if you are like building the deck, I would say probably around tier 3. It is a fun deck. You just OTK, play Pot of Extravagance, play Extravagance. You don't want to play Prosperity because then you can't OTK. But you play Extravagance. You can make like a Pentastag and attack with Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, do piercing. It's really, really cool. Next is Dogmatica. Dogmatica is decent with spellbooks. I wouldn't say it's like tier 3. The one major issue, I'd say, it's probably somewhere around Rogue. One major issue with pure Dogmatica is, for some reason, I always wonder why they do this. Again, Nadir Servant is limited to 1. Nadir Servant is the best card in the archetype. If Nadir Servant went to 3, it would not negatively impact the game. Like, it wouldn't. Like, that card is good, but it's not that good. There's so many better decks. So I honestly, Nadir Servant definitely needs to go to 3, and I think this deck would maybe be somewhere up here. It wouldn't even be that crazy. But yeah, it's definitely somewhere around Rogue. This is a really good deck. This is, what are they called? Dragon Link, they call it, because it's a bunch of different dragon archetypes all mixed into one. So many different ways to play this deck. You play a 60 card version, you can play the 40 card version. This is one of the more skill intensive combo decks in the game. One other thing that's really good about this deck is it actually can play through Nibiru through a variety of measures. One of the first things that you summon is, first of all, it's got so many extenders that if you get Nibiru, it's never the end of the world, because they have to Nibiru you mid-combo. It's not like Heroes. See, because Heroes, they could literally just wait till you're done with everything. Oh, cool, here's Nibiru. Here you go. Have fun. This, you know, at some point, when your opponent is playing Dragon Link, that they are going to summon a Borload Savage Dragon. And when they do that, you can't Nibiru them anymore. So you have to be smart about when you Nibiru your opponent. Whereas with other decks, like I said, with Heroes and with DDDs, you don't have to as much have to play around that. This deck will eventually end on a negate. The other thing that's really positive is this deck can summon Heretic Seal of Heavenly Spheres. Heretic Seal of Heavenly Spheres, when that card is tributed, for any reason, you can special summon a dragon from the deck. Any dragon. Its attack becomes 0, but you can summon any dragon. No restrictions. And it's not like you can't like activate the effects of the dragons. The effects of the dragons are like the dragon you summon is fully activatable. So as long as you summon a Heretic Seal of Heavenly Sphere to your side of the field before you get Nibiru'd, you can, once that monster gets tributed by the Nibiru, you can keep playing as much as you want to. So Nibiru is not as much of a problem. Hand traps aren't as much of a problem. The deck is actually really strong. I almost want to put this in tier 1 because the deck actually can outperform a lot of other decks. I might change it based on how tier 2 and tier 1 starts filling up. I might actually move this to tier 1, but I think this deck is actually very, very strong. It's definitely better than all of the other combo decks that I've shown. It's better than this, Adamancipator DD, I think it's definitely better than those two decks. It's got a much larger combo. It's got better combo starters, and it's got a much higher ceiling than those decks, and it doesn't quite fold to floodgates quite as much as these two do. Like for example, what this deck loses to is like sometimes you normal summon a rock and they like bounce or destroy that rock. That's not going to happen with this because you have like quick launches, you have a variety of other cards that can just put more monsters on the board, so it's not like the end of the world if one gets popped. Then you've got like the field spell, for example, could summon all of the rockets out of your hand. If you're going second, it can summon stuff out of the graveyard too. Like the deck can play through disruptions a lot better than a lot of the other combo decks here. Next, we've got Dragon Maids. I think this is one of the most overrated decks out there. I don't care if people get angry. Like it is a very overrated deck. I don't think this deck is that strong. I think people are obsessed with the artwork, and that dictates how many people play it. And I love when I pair up against this deck. Like most of the time, it's going to end up being a pretty easy win. Usually if they beat you, it's because of like Dragoon, or because they're playing the invoked version, or it's always like some other combination of things that's beating you. It's never like the Dragon Maid cards. The only Dragon Maid cards that you really have to watch out for is like the trap card and the one that's from the extra deck, the one that actually looks like a dragon from the extra deck that negates and then shuffles back and then summons another Dragon Maid. That card is good, and the trap card is good. Those are the two best cards in the archetype, and you have to watch out for those. The rest is kind of like iffy, but overall I think the deck is mostly carried by the artwork, and a lot of people play it because of that. Next we've got Herald, what are these called? Herald with Herald Drytron, I'd say is probably like a tier 3 deck. That Ben 10 hit, they never quite recovered. Ben 10 was like insane for them because it was like endless resources. Ever since that card got limited, they just like have sort of fallen off. It hasn't been as impactful, but the deck is really strong. If they go first, they essentially will. They probably will beat you if they go first to this day. Dustin's is a disaster. I don't even know what really to say about this deck. It's just really not that good. Next is, I'm going to call this Earth Machine. Earth Machine is a decent like tier 3 deck. I almost want to put this where ABC is, because the Therions will help this deck significantly, but I think this deck is very good with or without the Therions. Like, the Therions will make it better, but I think it's good even without the Therions, because the deck has just so much gas, and yeah, it just has so much, like, it's one of the decks that I really actually want to build in this game, and like a lot of the floodgates that would hurt other decks don't even like hurt this deck all that much. Like Skill Drain, Please skill drain me. Like, I'd be thrilled if you skill drain me. Half my restrictions get taken off. Like, this deck is really, really cool. Earthbound Immortals, definitely avoid at all costs. Yeah, this is a mess. It's like it's like an archetype full of boss monsters that you can't summon. It's like if you had 40 cards that were all Ultimate Conductor Tyrannos and no ways to get dinosaurs in the graveyard. That is literally the entire archetype. They need little monsters to help summon the bigger ones. Next we've got Eldlich. Eldlich is, I want to say this is like a tier 2 deck. It's the best trap card. It's the best trap deck to this day. This has been the best trap deck since day one. It's almost been a year since this game has come out, and this is still the best trap deck. Why is it the best trap deck? Because it can actually play 37 traps and 3 monsters. That's why it's the best trap deck. You go second, you set 5, and you don't have to split your negations between 2 turns. It's as simple as that. That's why it's the best trap deck. It can play the most traps. Eldlich has some really good built-in going second functionality. He can send himself to the graveyard to send a card on the field, and then send one of the cards in your hand to the graveyard. All of the trap cards float, unlike other trap decks. All of the trap cards float, so you can get more resources off them. So any loss that you would take from like a Harpy's Feather Duster or a Lightning Storm, you can recover because you can float into other cards. So that's like a huge benefit of the deck. The other major benefit of the deck is that Heavenly Prison is actually an insane card. It's a level 10 that protects your back row. It summons itself that sets any spawn trap card in the game to your back row. When that card got released, like, Eldlich just became even better than it already was, so the hit to Conquistador meant nothing. The only drawback to this deck is that a lot of the floodgates have gotten hit on the ban list. So, by a lot of the floodgates getting hit, like, not significantly hit, but they've been limited to 2. So, Skill Drain's now at 2, Imperial Order's gone, Vanities is gone. What else is gone? Some of the goes in matches at 2. So some of the floodgates have gone to 2. So that has hurt the consistency of the deck. There's also other variants of this deck. You can play the... Not invoked. I almost said invoked. You can play a version of this deck that is the branded version of this deck. You can also play the Zombie World version of this deck. The Zombie World version of this deck is really good against Floowandereeze. It basically deals with all of the different issues of Floowandereeze. I'd say it's probably like a tier 2 deck. Next is Endymion. Endymion is a very strong deck. It's probably the best pendulum deck that we have off the top of my head. I think it's better than DDD's. It's either a tier 3 or tier 2 deck. It's a very, very strong deck. It's probably somewhere around here. I really can't decide. Actually, I'll probably put it in tier 2. On top of that, we actually just got support some of the new pendulum stuff. We have Beyond Pendulum, which searches any pendulum monster in the game. Again, I don't really know if you're going to summon that over Metal Foes Electromite. I think Metal Foes Electromite is definitely like the go-to card that you're probably going to go into in a pendulum deck over the Beyond Pendulum. Beyond Pendulum lets you pop cards going second, and it allows you to search any pendulum card, which that is really good, but again, you really have to consider... I think Metal Foes Electromite still gives you more resources. Evil Eye is basically a deck that sits on one monster that just keeps gaining attack every single time, and it's basically like a Protect the Tower deck. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. It's not like a crazy good deck, but you can definitely get up there with this deck. This, I'm going to... Evil Hero Malicious Bane. I'm just going to put this where I put the other hero deck, which is... I already reviewed heroes. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to put this down there so I save a couple of slots for other stuff. Next is Evil Sworns. I think Evil Sworns is definitely like a consider building other decks. I'm going to put it like near Anomalies. It's just one of those decks that it had its time in the sun a few years ago. It has like very specific like floodgatey effects, but realistically, it's one of those Xyz decks where you should just play a different Xyz deck. I mean, if you really like it, build it. I'm not going to stop you, but I think other decks are just stronger. This, I imagine, is Exodia. Exodia is definitely going to consider building something else. I don't think it's quite an avoid at all costs, just because if you build one of those, like, draw your entire deck Exodia decks and you're going first, you can win games. It's just, if you play a draw your entire deck Exodia deck, and you go second, you basically just lost. There's nothing that you can really do, and it kind of sucks. This is the... Fairy Tale Snow is a good card. Fairy Tale Snow is played in a variety of decks. It's played in this, which is Branded Despia. It's played in any deck that can send it off of Branded Fusion. It's also played in like Familiar Possessed. It's played in the going second OTK Lunalight deck, but I do not think that you can play a pure... I don't think that you should play a pure Fairy Tale deck, like a Fairy Tale Snow, Fairy Tale Loon. I don't think you should play that deck pure. It's really not that good. But this card itself is quite strong. This is, I think it's Fire Fist. Fire Fist is like, consider building something else. If you want to play Fire Fist, probably just play tri-brigades. It will end better for you. Fire Kings is a decent deck. It's a deck that benefits from your cards getting destroyed, and then you get additional value. Almost never see this deck in like the ladder ever. Like, I've literally never played against this deck on Master Duel in my ever. Like, I've played against this deck. I've played this deck, but I've never seen this deck in Master Duel. And that's probably my own fault, because I'm like in the higher tier, so I never actually get to play a lot of these like fun decks. I don't get to ever play against a lot of these decks. But this deck is a decent deck that benefits off getting its own cards destroyed. But again, I'm never ever going to play against this deck, unfortunately. But overall, just based on my previous assessment of how this deck works, I think Runix is a very strong card. It comes back every standby phase, blows up the entire board, and then it comes back again and again and again. Once you get a Runix going, the deck can be very, very strong. But again, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to actually play against this deck, which is kind of sad. Fright for Fluffle, I think, is a rogue deck. Again, this is one of those archetypes where a few of their cards have actually trickled into Despia and other fusion decks, but I think the deck is actually a rogue deck. It's a strong deck, especially going second, but as I've said in the past, it has a lot of the hurdles that going second decks have, which is if you have a going second deck that is revolved around special summoning, it can be really tough for you to play, just because if you get like max seed or go through interruptions, it can be it can be a real struggle, especially if you're playing through like floodgates and stuff like that. This is Floowandereeze. It's probably the most hated deck in the entire game. I think this is like a tier 1 deck. I don't think it's, again, it has a really fair matchup against Despia. It's why Despia is the best deck in the game, because like one of the better boards that you can make in Floowandereeze is you make an M-Pen and you have a barrier statue on the field, and then you have, addition to the barrier statue, you've got the trap card set that allows you to special summon, to normal summon on your opponent's turn. That's one of the better boards that you can make in this deck. And that board is really not that strong against Despia, because they can just normal summon, attack over the barrier statue, summon a Mirror Jade in defense mode, banish the end pen, and then just go from there. Continue to build their board as if nothing happened. And again, if their cards are banished, they still get resources, even if they get de-shifted. It's not like other decks. Like if Eldlich gets de-shifted, it's a problem. If Dragonling gets de-shifted, it's a problem. Like Adamancipator, a lot of these decks, if they get de-shifted, any Pendulum deck, any card that leaves the field gets banished. Pendulums, when they leave the field, instead of going to the top of the extra deck, they get banished. Like, it's a problem. Bead Troopers, like if you Macrocosmos or D-Shifter, like most decks, they just flat out lose. But this deck doesn't really care about that, so that's why it's got kind of like a good matchup against. It's kind of holding this deck from being the best deck in the game. Yeah, so I think Floowandereeze is very strong. It's one of the most annoying decks in the entire game. It plays on your turn. It plays on your opponent's turn. They never stop. They're so annoying. On top of that, they play the barrier statue. They've got the Ryza. They've got Harpy's Featherstorm, which I actually don't even recommend playing. I think the thing that people misunderstand is they play a lot of more of win more cards. The best way to play some of these decks is just to play the core and then just play a lot of hand traps. And that is the version of Floowandereeze that is probably the strongest. Because you just play the barrier statue, you play the Ryza, you play the M-Pen, and those are your basic like tributes / monsters that you summon and put on the board. Those are the better monsters to put on the board. And then you just play a bunch of hand traps to prevent your opponent from doing anything. That is probably the best way to play against this deck, to play this deck. The other thing that's really beneficial about this deck, and I don't think I addressed this, the reason this deck is so good is because it's so different from every other deck in the game. It works around normal summons, not special summons. So automatically, Max C does literally nothing against this deck. I was actually playing a totally different deck. Every time I activated Pot of Duality, my opponent would just throw away their Max C, because they would assume that I am playing Floowandereeze. So they're like, okay, I'm never going to use this, and they would throw it out, and then I would just play a different deck that actually does special summon. But yeah, this is Again, this deck doesn't special summon. Maxi does nothing. It is a dead card if you open it against Floowandereeze. Also, you can play Maxi and it's perfectly fine. It's just your opponent has their Maxi is dead if you're playing Floowandereeze. Secondly, like if any like macrocosm or any card that banishes doesn't hurt this deck, so it allows you to play D-Shifter, the most powerful hand trap in the game. That's another like huge like benefit of this deck. D-Shifter just hurts every other tier 2 and tier 3 deck except for Despia. And even Despia, like there are a few interactions where you'd rather not have your cards banished. Like even like Despia and Tragedy, you'd rather just keep that in your graveyard because it does have a follow-up graveyard effect. But stuff like that, it's like it has a really strong matchup against a lot of decks. And if this deck goes first, most of the time it's like you have to scoop. Like if they set up that barrier statue lock, you basically lose. Next is Fortune Fairy / Ladies. This I believe this is Fortune Fairies. Fortune Fairies are not a good deck. Fortune Ladies are still not a good deck, but I would definitely consider building something else. They're a spellcaster based deck. They're just kind of decent. I don't think they're really that strong. This Fortune Fairy Every is, again, it's a pretty decent card. You get it for free out of the spellbook structure deck. It's a decent card. Fortune Ladies is just like a really weak archetype. Next is Fur Hires. You can actually mix Fur Hires with the new Scareclaw stuff, and that deck is actually quite strong. It can play through Nibiru, it can play through a variety of hand traps, Maxi, stuff like that. I definitely think it's somewhere around Rogue-ish. I think this with Scareclaw is actually quite a strong deck. I've seen it played a few different times. You can also mix it with like Tri-Brigade. It has a decent resource engine. Now I will say this. This is actually getting a new support card in, I don't know when. Again, Master Duel, you just don't know when stuff's coming out. But at some point, this gets another new support card, and that has 2 support cards. It's a little dragon, and it's getting a new Link monster. And those cards are actually both kind of decent. So you gotta keep your eyes peeled for those. Galaxy Eyes, I'd probably put somewhere near Blue Eyes. Again, this is one of those like it's a combo like it's a combo. Going second / going first deck. You can go either way, but the deck is actually quite strong. The problem with this deck is it is prone to bricking. When you have a lot of big monsters like that, it can end very poorly for you. That's kind of the biggest issue with Galaxy Eyes and Photon. Now you do have some like anti-bricking measures. You have like Galaxy Soldier, for example, which you can discard, special summon, search any Galaxy card, and then now you have a graveyard effect. You can trigger that. Like the deck has some cool stuff. You have Photon Orbital, which is really strong. You can attach it with Union Carrier. Like there's some really cool things in the deck that you can do, but overall I just think it's sort of like on the level. You could put it above Blue Eyes. You can put it anywhere sort of in Rogue. It just depends on the hand that you open. It can be a little weak sometimes. Gate Guardian is like one of the worst imaginable things that you can even put on here. It has had no support in years. It has the 3 monsters and Gate Guardian, and honestly the 3 monsters aren't worth summoning, and Gate Guardian is definitely not worth summoning. Like this is just, I don't even know what you would do with this. Very bad. This is Gem Knights. Gem Knights had an FTK. It's very difficult to pull off in Master Duel. It works more of like a beatdown strategy. I think it's definitely going to consider building something else. Generators. I want to put in like Rogue, but unfortunately they lost their best card, which was True King of All Calamities. It's a totally not in archetype card. It's a completely unaffiliated card. Without that card, this deck has a lot of struggle. It struggles to play, unfortunately. Next is Ghost Trick. This is another deck that took up like 5,000 spots in the UR department, and everybody kept pulling them and nobody wanted them. And there's a very good reason why nobody wanted them, so consider building something else. This is Gimmick Puppets. Is another deck that just it's an XC deck that there are just so many better XC decks out there. One of them has like an Exodia-like win condition, but again, just please, just for the love of everything, just play something else. Gladiator Beasts are kind of decent. You can mix them with Tri-Brigades. They're actually kind of decent. They have some cool plays. They can set up an easy like turn 1 Appaloosa along with some other stuff, Revolt. It basically like some hands are like, they feel like Tri-Brigade plus, and some hands just kind of feel like you bricked. So sometimes pure Tri-Brigade is just better off. It's weird because you can mix Tri-Brigade with a lot of archetypes. You can mix Tri-Brigade and Scareclaw with a lot of different like beast archetypes like Fire Kings and stuff like that, Wing Beast and Beast archetypes. But sometimes, honestly, it just feels better just to play regular pure tri-brigade, because then you brick less. I don't know what this is supposed to mean. I don't know what Goblin attack force. I don't know. I'm gonna for my sanity avoid that. Gokis are decent. They're like a decent rogue deck. I think they were actually a pretty cool choice in the Link Festival, but you rarely ever saw them. I think it's definitely like a rogue deck. It's a Link deck that every time a monster is like sent to graveyard, linked away, you get additional use. So you get a special summon from hand, you get search from deck, you get something by linking the monsters away. But it's kind of like a decent deck. Definitely don't play it pure or try to like build boards with it, like just generic Link boards. Next, Necro Valley. I'm going to say this is Gravekeepers. Gravekeepers are probably like somewhere here. It just depends on the meta. Like Gravekeepers is one of those things where, yeah, like what am I going to say? It depends on the meta. If the meta is hospitable, if the meta is very, very, very graveyard focused, then I think Gravekeepers are actually quite strong. If the meta is not hospitable to graveyard decks, I think it's just kind of like okay. Like if you activate this card against Floowandereeze, it does nothing. It literally does nothing. It does less than nothing. It might hurt you, but it definitely won't hurt them. So definitely Rogue for them. Gradles is probably bottom of Rogue. Kaiju Gradles. It's like a goofy, once in a while, this works out deck. Gren Maju is a deck you very rarely see in Master Duel, which is actually kind of shocking because Master Duel. All right, next up we've got Ice Hand and Fire Hand. I don't think this is worth playing. It's 6 cards. Unfortunately, 6. Actually, they have a new card. They have Thunder Hand, but honestly, I don't think that archetype is worth playing at this junction. This is Heroes. I've already rated Heroes. If you're playing any hero deck, you're playing essentially all of the heroes anyway, so I'm just going to put it down here with the other decks that are kind of like repeats. Next, this is Ice Barriers. Ice Barrier, I think, is like a bottom of Rogue deck. It's a lot of the older cards. It's weird. It's like a lot of the older cards are good, but at the same time, a lot of the older cards kind of suck. Like the older cards that like lock you out of doing stuff, or only let you summon once, or activate 1 card per turn. Like that stuff's good, but that stuff's harder to summon. The boss monsters are like kind of decent, I want to say. The Ice Barrier Trap is kind of decent. It's kind of iffy. I'd say it's probably like bottom of Rogue. This is Ignites. Again, this is one of those decks that you just rarely ever see anybody play. I'd say it's probably and consider building something else. If you're going to play it, probably mix it with the Ignoble Knights, which are right here, which I would put somewhere in Rogue. Again, this is another deck that you just almost never see. The second they lost that equip spell that makes your opponent discard from their hand, like the second they lost that card, the deck was like dead, and no one's ever seen it ever again, unfortunately. But that's where it would be. This is Adagnister. Adagnister is a decent deck. I'd say Adagnister is probably like a tier 3, probably like a tier 3 deck, maybe a tier 2 deck. I'd say it's probably somewhere around there. It makes a monster. It's unaffected by everything. That can be sort of difficult to get over in a best of 1 format. I mean, how do you get over something that is unaffected by everything? Yeah, I'd say it's probably like a tier 3 deck. It's got some good resilience. The field spell's insane. You pop in and you just get another one. Yeah, the deck is quite strong. It's one of the stronger combo decks available to you. This is Infernity. I'd say Infernity is kind of like, again, the best Infernity cards like Launcher and Infernity Archfiend are limited to 1. So they've gotten new support, but as I've said a million other times, like the best thing that they can do for Infernities is to take the Infernity cards that are limited off the ban list. That's the best thing that you can do for the deck. It's not release new stuff. They don't need Infernity Beast. They don't need all of these new cards. The best thing that you can do is just release the old stuff. The old stuff is not once per turn, and it has insane effects. It lets you add back. It lets you search. That's the stuff they need, not the old stuff. This is Infernoids, not Infernity, Infernoids. Infernoids, I'd say, is probably like top of Rogue. It's a going second deck that just, again, it blinds second. You use Reasoning, Monster Gate, Reasoning, Monster Gate, Grassic Screener, the card that searches Grassic Screener, Left Arm Offering. You just basically need to mill as many cards as possible, and then you OTK your opponent. Has the same issues as all of the other going second decks. They need to special summon a bunch of cards, which is if your opponent max sees you, you basically lose. Which is one of like the greater issues of the deck. Next is Giant Ballpark. This is one of my favorite decks. I'd say this is probably like low Rogue, unfortunately. Again, it's a going second deck. You need to special summon a ton. you're playing through interruptions, plus you're playing through Max C. Max C is a lingering effect. Lingering effects hurt going second decks much more than lingering effects hurt going second decks much more than floodgates or floodgates or any of the other like issues. Floodgates or negates could ever hurt a going second deck. And lingering effects are just the worst because it's a lasting effect that prevents you from doing anything for the rest of the turn. Next is invoked. I'm going to assume this is invoked dogmatica Shadal, which I'd probably put in like tier 3. Again, Nadir Servant really needs to go to 3 copies. It's holding back a lot of different decks, and I don't think it's a particularly unfair card by any means. Like I said, it's probably somewhere around here. It's a deck that you again, this is one of those decks that you just barely see. The majority of the decks that you actually see are usually you see a lot of Despia, you see a lot of Floowandereeze, Eldlich. You actually don't see that much Dragon Link, and that's because I think it just takes a lot more skill than other combo decks. And then for the most part, you just kind of see a mix of the top tier decks. But you don't see Dogmatica Shadal invoked as much as you used to, but it's still a very strong deck. You have to respect it. This is missing. I don't think it's missing a support card. They got a new support card in the TCG. Had almost no impact whatsoever on the game. Again, it's like at least they have Union Carrier, but this deck needed like a structure deck, not one new card. This is Kaijus. I wouldn't recommend playing pure Kaijus. I recommend playing Kaijus. I recommend playing Kaijus in certain decks. Lunalight Kaiju's a decent deck. If I see is Lunalight, what's her name? Fairy Tale Luna. Is she somewhere? No, she's not. I'd say Fairy Tale Luna with the Kaijus and like a going second, a rank 8 package is probably like a tier 3 deck. So I'd probably put that up there. But generally, just pure Kaijus, please. Just save yourself the grief, I assure you. This is Cosmos. Cosmos is a decent deck. I'd probably say it's somewhere in Rogue tier. I don't think there's a deck that is hurt more by Ash than like any... Like this deck loses to Ash harder than like any other deck in the entire like list. It's kind of crazy. Like other decks lose to like D-Shifter and like Nibiru and like all this random stuff. Like this deck really gets shit on by Ash Blossom. And essentially everybody plays Ash Blossom. This is tough to rate. Like I could technically this is like Earth Machines, but it's also trains. This is just Ancient Gears, but like better, because it just is more consistent and it doesn't require you to fuse 4 monsters to make 1 monster to lose that 1 monster. So I'd say it's probably like somewhere in Rogue, top of Rogue. It's a good going second deck. Zombie World is a good deck. So pure Zombie World lost Crystron Hackle-Vibrax. That was a huge hit to the deck. You can play this deck in a variety of different ways. You can play either a fusion zombie deck, which I do have on the channel. You can go see it. It can very, I don't say easily, it's not like an easy deck to play, but it can carry you to Diamond Tier 1. It will take some like skill and like knowledge to actually learn the deck, but it can take you to Diamond Tier 1 because it does use the Despia package, uses the Ghost Fusion package, it uses all that various stuff. But this deck actually has a really good matchup against a variety of different decks. It can play Rivalry of the Warlords, which will lock every single deck into zombies, which no one else plays but you. This deck doesn't have the very best matchup against Eldlich unless you already have a Doom King on the board, in which Eldlich is very, very strong. Yeah, if you have Doom King on the field and they activate Eldlich, you just banish the Eldlich. It's amazing. It's a really strong effect. On top of that, it has just an okay matchup against Despia, but it has a really good matchup against Floowandereeze because monsters that are only zombies can be tribute summoned, so they can't tribute summon any of their big birds, only the zombies. It's really strong. But again, Crystron kind of hurt the deck a lot, but outside of Crystron, you can kind of mix it with fusion engines. Lyrilusk Tri-Brigade is probably like up here in like tier 3. It's a decent, I'd say it's a pretty decent deck. It can still make a really strong board. It wasn't like really ever hit. It can make a fairly strong board because, and I think it got some cards back if I'm not mistaken. But this wasn't really all that much hit, but it can make a pretty like formidable board where you can make like a Bird of Sovereignty and a Barrier Statue and the Utopic Future and a variety of other things, and it's a tough board to break. Also, I forget this girl's name, but she bounces special summon monsters. Like it can make an actually pretty sizable, pretty strong board. Mist Valley Apex Avion, it can make a pretty strong board that can be hard to break, and it kind of raises the ceilings of the tri-brigades quite a bit. On top of that, you got the Revolt and the Shirag. You have a lot of things going on. Madolche is a good deck. I'd say Madolche is probably in like tier 3 and probably a little bit higher tier 3. Again, it's one of those decks, it can actually play against like a round D shifter because they're XYZs. They're Xseeds, so they can detach materials, which is really good. In addition to, yeah, it's just really, really, really good against a variety of decks. It's not like an overbearing, like hard combo deck. The only thing that really hurts is that they lost Crossout Designator, and that sort of hurts the deck to a certain degree because that was like a very, very necessary card for them. But outside of that, I think that the deck overall is pretty good. You still have the 2 Call by the Graves, the 1 Crossout Designator. You can play through hand traps here and there. Ash Blossom, a good Ash Blossom, a good Imperm can actually really hurt the deck sometimes, which is very, very problematic for them. Next, we've got Magical Musketeer Max. Despite having one of the greatest Link ones that have ever been printed, this deck still has a bit of trouble. It is a very strong deck. Again, going second, you summon the Link one, and then you can either search for spawn trap cards or summon a bunch of monsters. You can choose whichever, depending on what you're playing against. It's actually kind of crazy. Like, the deck does have some really cool plays. It's one of the decks that like, it's a cheap deck too, because you, like, once you pull Max, I'm pretty sure the majority of the deck is actually all super rares. I think Max is the only ultra rare in the entire archetype. Everything else is essentially super rare. It's actually kind of budget, but you do need to play at least 2 copies of Max. It's a decent deck. It can get you into like platinum / diamond, but it'll have trouble grinding with something like a Despia, and it'll have trouble against something like a Floowandereeze, especially going second. So I definitely put it somewhere in Rogue. Next is Magispector. Their best monster is unfortunately banned, which is Kieran. The rest of the deck is just kind of decent. I don't think it's even worth pendulum summoning. Most of the time you'll play them as like a control deck with Ties of the Brethren. You summon 1, use Ties of the Brethren, summon the other 2, search, dispel, whatever you need to, because they activate a normal or special summon. Every single monster in the archetype is like a Chaos Max Dragon, where they can't be destroyed by card effects, can't be targeted. So that part is really cool. But again, they're a bunch of Chaos Max Dragons. If Chaos Max Dragon was like a little raccoon that was 1200 attack, that's kind of the issue with the archetype. Next is Mathmax. Mathmax is a good archetype. They are missing, I wouldn't say they're like tier 3, but they are missing I think one more support card. I lose track of what's released and what's not. I think it's Circular. They're missing Circular, and Circular is like insane. It sends for cost and special summons itself, and then sends another card. Foolishes and sends for cost. It's a really, really strong card, but again, they're missing a really strong card that will make the deck. Like if they release that card today, I'd say this is probably a tier 2, maybe even tier 1 deck. But unfortunately, most likely when it does get released, it will be released with tier elements and splites, which will just be better than this. It's kind of crazy. It's like in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's not what the card is, it's when the card is released. Like, literally any deck in the game can come in and just like power creep this at any time, because this meta is really a weak meta. But it just depends on the cards. This is my Akashi. I think my Akashi is probably consider building something else, and that something else would be the Zombie World. I think that you can definitely use a lot of the Mayakashi cards in Zombie World, in Sharanui, in just a zombie deck in general. The best way to play a zombie deck is just to play a little bit of everything. You play a couple of Mayakashi cards, you play a couple of Sharanui cards, you play a little bit of everything, and I think that's really the way to play zombies. It's not to just stick to one archetype, unfortunately, because they're not all that strong on their own. I can't really see this, but I want to say this is Megalith. I'm pretty sure this is Megalith. I think Megalith is a decent ritual deck. I think it's probably somewhere up here. I have been wrong again. I can't really zoom on this, unfortunately. But yeah, I'd say Megalith is probably like a higher rogue deck. And they're pretty cool. They summon, you can ritual summon from like a deck. They do some crazy stuff. Pop cards. They have some decent interruptions. I think Megalith is a decent rogue deck, and you get a decent amount of them just for free out of the solo mode, and then you unlock the pack and you can just go from there. So it's a decent deck to go into. I have no idea what this is supposed to mean. This is just a Crusadia Max. I think Crusadia Max is a great card, but I don't even understand how that's a deck. Melfi's is a card that you can mix with Melfi's with tri-brigades, but I honestly think just regular pure tri-brigades is actually better than Melfi's. So again, Melfi's has some cool effects where if your opponent basically activates any monster effect or attacks, they can special summon and do a variety of other things. But generally, the only thing they get out of playing the Malphys is just one extra Exceed monster that provides an interruption. Other than that, it's probably better just to play regular tri-brigade or Zodiac tri-brigade. Metal Foes hasn't really been played since Zodiac format, other than Metal Foes Electromite, which is played in every single Pendulum deck. But pure Pendulums, I just don't see anybody playing this. Metal Foes was actually a decent deck in the Rare and Common Festival, but again, it's just in pure Metal Foes, in like regular Master Duel ladder, I would say consider building something else, and the other else is going to be like a Pendulum Magician or an Endymion deck or something like that. I think that would be better. Monarchs is, and I don't want to say this, but I have to say it. I don't want to say it. Is Rogue, and it's probably just a worse Floowandereeze deck. It is a Floowandereeze. It is basically, it does what Floowandereeze does, but it can't summon on your opponent's turn. It can't play D-Shifter. It can't play around D-Shifter, and it can't play around Mexi. It is Floowandereeze, but worse, unfortunately. Yeah, I'd say probably around Rogue. This is Mutants. I'd say Mutants probably around like Rogue, like probably like somewhere around here, like second half of Rogue. It's not like a bad deck. It puts up a decent amount of interruptions. Its fusion is actually quite strong, but again, it's just one of those decks that's just like it's stuck at the bottom tier until they get some like actually serious support, unfortunately, because at this point it's just not strong enough. Nephthys is literally Fire Kings, but worse. And it's one of those decks that actually has like a chapter and everything, but it literally is a worse Fire King deck because it does what Fire King does. The Fire Kings do, but on top of that, you actually have to ritual summon, so you have to play all these like low resource cards, high resource cards, I should say. It does have a one ritual monster, which is a level 2. That's like insane. It like summons a ritual monster from your deck, ignoring summoning, can just like any sacred beast, ignoring summoning. That effect is crazy, but again, the deck, imagine how bad a deck has to be that they can release something like that and it still is not a good deck. So I definitely consider building something else, and the other else I would consider is Fire Kings, which is not that much better than this deck right here. Karyu Shin. This deck is very interesting. I would say this is high tier 3, maybe tier 2. I'd say probably higher tier 3. This deck is very interesting. There's a variety of ways that you can actually play this deck. You can play a more sort of combo-ish version where you always go into a totally awesome and then have the Kairyu spell set face down. You can go into a far more control version of the deck. It really depends on the meta that you're playing against. This deck has a really good matchup against a lot of decks. It has a good matchup against Floowandereeze. It has a good matchup against Dragon Link, Eldlich. If they have an Eldlich on field, they can't activate any of their Eldlich traps to summon another Eldlich or an Eldlich trap because they can only summon one monster that's not in water. It has a good matchup against this. It can go second because the Karyu Shin has a continuous effect to automatically send all cards your opponent controls until they control one non-water monster. So it's a floodgate-ish deck, but it's a lot more flair than Floowandereeze because they only really have one card that activates on your opponent's turn, which is the Dark Reef. The deck is really fair. Also, if they don't see the field spell, or if you get rid of their field spell, the deck is kind of like dead. Like without the field spell, you can't use the jellyfish. It can't negate. And you can't use the effect of the Karyu Shin to limit everything to one non-water monster. Also, another huge issue is that Floowandereeze has a water monster, which if they have that water monster, now they can just kind of like go into the bigger monsters or other monsters in general. And then on top of that, you've got Marincess, which is, I haven't put it on this list, but it's another water deck that you see actually very often in ladder. And then when you play the mirror match, it's also like a very rough situation. So it really depends on how many good water decks there are. And on top of that, like the deck is, it's got some really bad matchups. And on top of that, if you don't see that field spell, you literally just lose. And I know in most cases, like you have a lot of copies of the field spell because you have like terraforming, you have metaverse, you can send them the legendary ocean off the field spell and then just activate it back with sea stealth. Like there's a lot of ways to get, you have the Warrior of Atlantis. There's a lot of ways to get to the field spell, which is legendary ocean, but there are games you just open with no field spell and you literally cannot play. There's nothing that you can do. The game is just over. The other benefit is of this deck is that you can actually main deck There Can Only Be One, which is a really strong floodgate in this deck and against a lot of decks. Like There Can Only Be One beats Dragon Link, it beats Endymion, it beats Floowandereeze, it beats Eldlich, it beats Adagnisters. Like it beats almost every single deck here. It literally beats almost every. It does not beat the Despia deck, but it beats literally almost every other deck in tier 1 and tier 2. So this deck has a lot of good matchups, but it also has a few matchups that are just really unplayable. The other thing that's really good about this deck is against swordsoul, for example. It has a really cool situation where it reduces all water monsters on both players' side of the field and hands by 1 level. Every token that you summon is a water token. Like for example, the Mui token is a water token. So when you summon that token off the Mui, it reduces its level by 1. Mui is a water monster, so that gets reduced by 1. So the level 8 that you would typically be able to summon becomes a level 6 that you can summon, and they don't play level 6 synchros. So you kind of lock them out of that, and if they don't know that going in, they really can kind of screw up. So that is actually quite strong. It lowers all water monsters by 1 level, and then of course the floodgate effect. It's a very strong deck, but unfortunately, and it came out at a very weird time. I think if this deck came out a few months ago, it would have been a lot better. Like when it didn't come out alongside Marincess, and it didn't come out alongside Floowandereeze, and it didn't come out, and soon Tier Limits is going to drop, and they have water monsters, and Splites are going to drop, and they have Totally Awesome and the Frogs. Like, I don't know why they chose to drop this deck at this point in the game, because if this deck had been around on release, and you could play this against, like, this deck can literally break a full Drytron board. The only issue, again, is that it's just, again, the main issue is just it's not about what cards are released, it's when the cards are released, because it depends what they are competing against. And right now it's a little bit of a weaker meta, but unfortunately there are some water decks. This is, I believe this is the Numeron monster that they summon, but I'm not entirely sure, but I think this is the Numeron monster. Like the big Numeron. I'm going to hold off on this for a few seconds just because I'm going to verify that in my mind, and then I'll come back to it. I'm pretty sure that's the Numeron monster, like the one that banishes everything. Nurse Burn, this deck I'd say is a rogue. I'm going to put this where I put Chain Burn. Like sometimes they just have this and you don't have any outs because there's a best of 1 format and you just lose. And unfortunately those people are stuck in whatever rank they're in. They'll be in like Platinum like 3. And they'll just win with like Chain Burn and Nurse Burn, and it'll be like they'll lose and they'll win, they'll lose, they'll win, and unfortunately sometimes you get matched up against them and you just lose, and you got to take the L and move on. But the deck is kind of decent. Ugduatic is the best reptile deck that we have, but it's still not that good. It's better than Mutant, it's better than Aliens, is better than all of the other decks. It's probably around like mid rogue, somewhere around there. It's not like an outrageously good deck. It benefits from sending everything to the graveyard, all of it benefits from sending all of the, what are they called? The monsters to the graveyard, the reptile monsters to the graveyard. You can finally actually play Snake Rain, and it does something. Orchist is probably higher rogue. There's still a card that's like banned, that's still limited, unfortunately, or banned, which is the Heart Pour. The deck is just in a weird state where it's really not in a place where it's not in a place where it's ready to win. Also, I think Girsu is not so great either. Not like it's a good card, but I'm pretty sure it might be somewhere on the ban list. But again, this is one of those decks you just do not see. Tier 3, Tier 1. You don't see. Like once you get past Platinum, you might see it once ever, and you just don't see it. This is Paleozoics. I think Paleozoics are probably in like Rogue. Unfortunately, Totally Awesome, and this is a continuing theme. Totally Awesome is limited to 1. They limited Totally Awesome to 1 because they were afraid of what Totally Awesome might do in Master Rule 5, in the TCG and the OCG. Turns out Totally Awesome did absolutely nothing. But at this point, Splites are about to come out, and I don't know what direction they're going to go to hit Splites. So they will either ban Toad, or they'll ban Ronin Toad, or they'll ban something. But at some point, Toad will either be banned, or one of the frogs will be banned. Something will happen where we will no longer have one of the cards in the game, and that will inevitably make this deck weaker. At this point, having one Toad is actually quite frustrating in this deck because you are forced to always use the effect of Toad to put Toad back in the extra deck when that is not the effect that you want to do. And also, if your opponent has Call by the Grave and like you activate Toad to negate tribute Toad, if you tribute Toad and they Call by the Grave, they stop the negate and they stop you adding back a water monster back to your hand. They stop 2 of your very good Toad effects with 1 Call by the Grave. And it's not like you can go into a second Toad or negate with a second Toad because you literally only have 1 Toad. This might be a good deck for that anti-spell tournament, but I don't think it's that good overall. Pendulum Magicians are probably like tier 3. It's pretty good. I think Endymion again is still the best Pendulum deck, but this is a pretty strong deck. I'd say it's gotten better. It's got the new Pendulum cards, and especially the Pendulum Beyond Pendulum, which is a pretty good card. But again, it probably going into Metal Foes Electromite in 9 out of 10 cases. Phantasm Spiral is a good rogue deck. I've used this to get to Diamond. I don't know where I'm at right now. I haven't been playing that much this exact month because I'm waiting for the new I've been waiting for the new battle pass to drop, so I can actually get the rewards from that. But so far I've been ranking up with this deck. It's extremely easy. The Umi support is very, very good in this deck. The game with this when you play Phantom Spirals, it goes one of 2 ways. You either win because you flip. You either win in like 3 minutes or you lose in 3 minutes. Like you get an answer pretty quick. You're not going into these 40-minute grind games. I've never gone into a long game with Phantom Spirals. Usually win or lose, which I like about the deck because you either flip a floodgate and win, or you flip a floodgate and win rather quickly, or you don't. And then also if you just don't draw the field spell, you literally just lose the duel. It's insane. If this is a deck that relies on a field spell, probably more than Legendary Ocean relies on a field spell. Also, Legendary Ocean and Phantasm City both share the name Umi, so some of the support from Legendary Ocean is actually playable in the Umi support deck. So you've got, for example, Fish Sonar, which is very, very strong in this deck because Fish Sonar allows you to search a normal water monster from your deck and then special summon a normal water monster if you control an Umi on your side of the field, which the city is. So you can actually summon a Megalo Smasher and you can search a Megalo Smasher. So it's like Fossil Dig and Unexpected Die, both on a single card, and it's an SR instead of a UR, which was the Fossil Dig was a UR, so you actually save money and live better. It's actually fantastic. Phantom Knights is a very strong deck. I'd probably say it's probably in like tier 2. It's one of the better decks. It's got a good combo potential. It's decent going second. It's like outrageously good, but it's got good exceeds that help you go second. Forbidden Droplets is very good going second. It's got a few different options going second. But yeah, it's actually quite a strong deck overall. I like it over a lot of these other decks just because it has a lot more versatility. I don't think it's as good as like Dragon Link, obviously, and Despia, stuff like that, because they just have more. They have more gas in the tank, but overall, this is a very strong deck. Next is Plunder Patrol. I think Plunder Patrol is definitely like a higher tier rogue deck. If you don't know what this deck does, you are going to lose so fast, you're not going to know what the hell happened to you. It is a very, very, very strong deck, especially when your opponent has no idea what is going on. I think this had a chapter in solo mode. I might be wrong, but yeah, this is a very strong deck, especially when you have no idea what it does. Prank Kids is a tough one to grade. So Prank Kids is a deck that got hit, even though it didn't perform that well at the Duelist Cup, but then it got hit after the Duelist Cup. And I don't really know why they chose to do that. Like, the best performing decks were not Prank Kids, so why they hit Prank Kids, I'm not entirely sure. It just kind of was like a scapegoat. I think it's a higher tier 3 deck. It's still a very strong deck. The only issue with Prank Kids is, although it is very strong and it is very versatile, it lost. So Prank Kids Meow Meow is now at 1, which means you can only do that effect once, and it banishes itself and you can't get it back. The only way you can get it back is if you play Nemesis. And if you play Nemesis, then it's fine, because Nemesis is actually a decent card. Nemesis is a decent card in Prank Kids because it shuffles back a banished monster and then it summons itself, and then you can make a Thunder Dragon Colossus, which is a nice end board because it's a fusion, so it's a nice end board. Stops your opponent from searching. That part is good. Now the issue is, again, what is the ratio that you want to play. You're almost always going to banish something because you're playing 3 Roxy's, and Roxy's is going to banish a card from your hand to draw, and you will go through all of your pendulum, all of your prank kids effects every single time. One of the other drawbacks is that they hit the adventure package, which I put down there. The adventure package they actually hit. So now, like I said before, the adventure package has 4 starters and 3 bricks. That is outrageously stupid. You have 2 Rite of Aramesir, you have 1 Water Enchantress, and you have 1 Foolish Burial, and then you have Draco back, Griffin Rider, and Fateful Adventure. You have 3 bricks and you have 4 starters. It's just a really bad ratio. Now the thing is, this deck only really needs 1 card to combo off. Any Prank Kid monster is full combo, and it ends on a board wipe and it ends on a spawn trap card wipe and a board wipe. You can also play a Phoenix Enforcer still, because you don't really lock yourself into anything unless you don't really lock yourself into anything until you activate Pandemonium. After you activate Pandemonium, you lock yourself. But before then, you're good to go. You can summon whatever you want. You can link summon. You can live your life. As long as you don't activate Pandemonium, you're good to go. But the deck, again, is a pretty strong deck. It just takes a lot more of a resilient pilot than it used to. The other thing is, again, it's one of those decks like Adamancipator, where sometimes you summon a Prank Kid and they will destroy or bounce the Prank Kid, and you just lose. They just normal summon a Prank Kid and they Widow Anchor the Prank Kid, take your Prank Kid. It's okay, well, what am I supposed to do now? That's how the deck is played. Sometimes you lose your Prank Kid and you lose the duel. Predaplants, I'd say, as I consider building something else. As a pure deck, it's really tough to play, and it's getting new support later on. So I would wait for that new support and then maybe consider playing the deck then. But pure, I don't think it's the best. This is Punks. I think Punks is somewhere in Rogue. Thank God they still do have the Punks still have Chaos Ruler, I believe is a magical Chaos Ruler guy. For some reason that got hit in the TCG because it mills 5 cards, and every tier limit card mills 75 cards. But yeah, at least that's still in this game, and it's a fully legal card. The issue is you did lose Crystron, and Crystron was actually a big part of the combo for this deck, so it's kind of a sad thing that kind of got lost before the deck really got all of its support. I'd say it's probably somewhere in midish Rogue, somewhere around there, somewhere around here. It's a Rogue deck, not the best, but it's still very much playable. This card is just, I don't know what they want me to do with this. This is a monster, so I'm just gonna put it down here. Red Eyes is, I'd say, probably somewhere in Rogue. It's missing Dragoon. I've been saying this for the last 4 tier lists that I've done. Dragoon should be released in this game. It should. They should ban Verde Anaconda, and they should put Dragoon in. There's no reason why Dragoon is not in this game. There's so many more broken cards, so many more annoying cards than Dragoon. Dragoon is well past its prime. Dragoon is very playable in 2020. It's 2022, almost 2023. No one in the TCG plays Dragoon whatsoever, and it's banned. I literally tell you, nobody plays it. Red Eyes Fusion locks you into only summoning Dragoon and nothing else. And there's so many outs to Dragoon that it's almost outrageous. Every boss monster basically has the protection of Dragoon. Most of the time, better protection than Dragoon. So I really don't know why Dragoon is banned. Take it off the ban list. Let's have some fun. Next is it's a Winda. I think these are Spiritual Beasts, I want to say. Yeah, because it's not Gusto. Yeah, it's Spiritual Beasts. Spiritual Beasts, I think, are a decent deck. I'd say somewhere in Rogue. It's a decent deck, but it's not outrageously good. They tag themselves out. They banish themselves, go into others. It's a decent deck, but nothing too crazy. Borreload Savage Dragon. This is a weird one. This is Borreload, just regular Borreload Dragon. I already rated Dragon Link, and Dragon Link doesn't even really play Borreload anymore, unfortunately. This is Rongo Bongo. The only deck that can really still summon this, since the level 3 got banned, is Floowandereeze. Certain Floowandereeze builds can actually play this, but again, the best Floowandereeze deck that you can play is actually just a pure Floowandereeze deck with as many hand traps as possible. That is the most consistent and the one that will probably take you to Platinum Tier 1. It's not the one with Rongo Bongo. It's not the one with Harpy's Featherstorm. The best one that you can play is probably just a pure Floowandereeze deck. Next is Salamangrates, I think, is a tier 2 deck. It's a very strong deck. It might even be a tier 1 deck, honestly. It's a very strong deck. I might put it up here. Like these are the two that I'm like considering. Like maybe I should put up there. But these two decks are very, very strong. Heat Soul is really, really good in this deck. They took some cards off the ban list, which has actually made the deck better. The structure deck has made the deck very accessible. The only thing you really have to craft is like Access Code Talker. This is probably one of the better decks that you should craft, just because it actually is cheap. Like I see a lot of people complaining that Despia is so expensive. To craft this, like I understand Despia is expensive and it sucks because obviously they removed the older packs, and now if you didn't get those older packs, you can't really make Despias. But honestly, this is probably the better option if you just can't afford Despias, or you could just log in every day for a month, play, and then just make Despias. But yeah, it's a very strong deck. It has it has some bad matchups. I'll say that it is a bad matchup against like tier elements. Has a really good bad matchup against like Umi control, but a lot of decks do. Has a bad matchup against Eldlich sometimes, but it does have a recurable counter trap. So Eldlich does have like counter traps, but this can recur a counter trap, so it can stop its counter traps and its floodgates. It does lose to floodgates, much like other decks. It loses to there can only be one, for example. It loses to skill drain like very easily, but again, it can. A lot of decks lose to that stuff, so I can't really count it against it. Scraps as a pure deck, I wouldn't say play it. Scrap Raptor and in Dinosaurs, yes. Scraps pure, let's not kid ourselves. Shaddolls, you can play Shaddolls. I'd say it's like tier 3. You can mix Shaddolls with Dogmatica, Invoked, but you can also mix Shaddolls with the Despia package. The Despia slash what am I saying? The Despia, not a Luber, the Despia branded. That's what I meant to say. Yeah, you can mix it with branded, and then it's a decent like combo start. You can put a light in the graveyard. You start yourself off. Shino Birds is actually a pretty decent going second deck. It's another like going second needs to special summon deck. So it's a good deck. Like it can like wipe away your opponent's board. It can put a Amato Wado on the field. It can do a lot of things. This is one of those decks that's like a sleeper deck for a lot of festivals, because a lot of festivals totally forget to hit this mechanic. But definitely not for this festival because it's an anti-spell festival. Shiranui I'm going to put next to Mayakashi. I think it's just I consider building something else. I think you should just build a zombie world deck, and then you can play a ton of Shiranui monsters in that zombie world deck. But as a pure deck, the problem with Shiranui's is that it requires a lot of setup. That's the biggest issue with the deck. It requires so many things to already be in the graveyard, and then you can do cool stuff with the stuff in the graveyard, but it's tough to get that stuff in the graveyard in the first place. So I would definitely consider that. This is Simorgs, like pure Simorgs, I think. It's probably somewhere around here. Simorgs as a pure deck is played a little bit like Floowandereeze, but just not as good. Like it's kind of like Monarchs. Monarchs are less good Floowandereeze, and this is a less good. It's like a combination of like Monarchs and Floowandereeze, because you do still special summon, but a lot of the cards are actually like normal summon. Like they're birds that normal summon themselves, that tribute summon larger birds. They allow you to reduce the amount of tributes needed for a bird summon. Like there's a lot of things that it's almost like it's almost like an evolution. It was like it went from this to Floowandereeze, and Floowandereeze is just literally this deck but better. 6 Samurais are probably somewhere in like rogue tierish. When they combo off, they literally can do anything. Like I mean anything. Like when that red and blue samurai combo off, you literally can get endless resources. You can play for the next hour. Of course, there is a time limit, so you can't actually play for as long as you want to. But yeah, I think it's the biggest issue with this deck is the timer is very much against you. I don't know why this is here again. This is Samurai. Yeah, this is also 6 Samurai. Skull of Servants is a going second deck. It's probably somewhere with the other going second decks that just have trouble playing in a best of one format where you can get Maxeed. This is Speedroids. Speedroids is a decent rogue deck. I don't think it's like broken by any means, but it can put up some cool interruptions. It could put up, it could put up some, make Baron de Fleur very easily, Crystal Wing, stuff like that. It can put up a pretty cool board, but nothing like too crazy. Spell books are a decent deck mixed with Dogmatica. I think, again, this is a decent deck, but it has a lot of trouble with a lot of variety, like a variety of different things. Namely, the biggest thing is Nadir Servant is limited to 1, and that is like the main starter of the Dogmatica engine. Also, it's missing a lot of other cards, like Ultimate Slayer is going to be very good in this deck. It's missing Garuga. Like, there's a lot of cards that are very good in the Dogmatica package that just don't exist yet. And obviously, Nadir Servant is banned. You have to mix this with some kind of like other spellcaster deck. You can't just play pure spell books because unfortunately they're just not that strong. So you have to mix it with something. You mix it with Dark Magician, Dogmatica, something, but it has to be mixed with some other spell deck, unfortunately. This is Springens. Springens is just kind of okay. It's the worst of the it's the worst of this particular, like, I don't know what they call it, like this is when the archetypes are like all mixed together. I forget what it's called. It's like a like an archetypal saga. So this is, you've got Springens are mixed with like they're mixed with tri-brigades and Despia and swordsoul and all that stuff. But this is probably the worst out of all of them, which is Springens. Next we've got Spirals. They really need Illusion of Chaos, which is a ritual monster. I'm gonna put it like at the bottom of like tier 3. They really need Illusion of Chaos, because Illusion of Chaos searches Magician Souls, and the Magician Souls puts the Spiral Master in the graveyard, which allows them to combo off, and they're really missing that. You can still like win tournaments and get to Platinum tier 1, or I mean to Diamond tier 1 with this, but again, it's going to take a little bit of effort. This is Star Seraphs. This literally is an archetype with like 3 cards. Stardust with Synchrons and all that other stuff is probably somewhere in Rogue. Literally, if Junk Speeder gets ashed or negated in any way, you just lose the duel. You might as well just scoop there, and that's kind of the problem with this archetype. It relies so heavily on Junk Speeder. If anything happens to Junk Speeder, you lose the duel and move on. And it's kind of frustrating. This is Steel Swarms. I'd say it's probably somewhere around here. Again, I'm just put it. You're better off just playing something else. Constellars. I just think these decks are just in such a weak state right now. Like all of these like legacy Exceed decks are just, they are at one point very, very strong, but they're just like, they're very, very, very weak right now. Bujinkis, all this other stuff. This is the Sky Strikers, I think is a tier 3 deck. It's probably like higher tier 3. Has a really good matchup against a lot of decks, but also has really bad matchups against a lot of decks. It's very, very strong. It just got Widow Anchor to 3. It's got 1 Kagari. It's got 2 Engage. Like, it's got decent numbers. At some point, it's going to get even more support. It's going to get a searchable Kaiju. It's going to get some other support. But I think this deck is kind of like a decent tier 3 deck. It's very, very annoying to play against. A lot of the time, this is one of the only decks that can make Phoenix Enforcer. Like, it's literally like, the decks that can make Phoenix Enforcer are most of the time going to be the Sky Strikers and Fearos. But other than that, most decks have actually cut it. You still got to deal with it with them. This is Guru Control. I think is probably somewhere like bottom of tier 3. It's another like heavy floodgate deck in the same sense as Eldlich is a heavy floodgate deck. You literally just flip monsters. You flip Guru, and then you search Fiendus, and then you have a negate in hand, and you set like goes in match, and there can only be one, and all that stuff, and you win doing that. Summon Skull is a terrible deck. The support that they give Summon Skull is just goofy. They give support that it's all over the place. It's like a ritual monster, an Exceed monster, a synchro monster. It's all over the place. It's not any good. I honestly can't really see what this is from this. It looks like a battling boxer, but I'm not sure, so I'm just going to put it right there. This is probably somewhere in Consider Building something else. It makes a crazy boss monster. I'm for some reason, my mind is just, I can't remember what the name of the archetype is, but I know Red Layer is one of the cards in it. It makes a giant Exceed monster that is basically like a giant Power Ranger. It's like a Megazord that is unaffected by everything, that loses to 1 Kaiju. It's a little tough to make it, but when you do make it, it's unaffected by everything, unfortunately. Underworld Goddess is pretty much a staple in Master Duel, which allows you to out any monster by linking away your opponent's monster. Super Heavy Samurais are probably somewhere in Rogue. It steals your opponent's spawn trap cards, but only the generic ones are good. And unfortunately, not a lot of decks are playing generic spawn trap cards. Swordsoul, I forgot all about that. Swordsoul is another tier 1 deck. I think it's better than Floowandereeze. It's like 1, 2, 3. Yeah, Swordsoul is very strong. It is the only thing it lost, I think, was it lost the heavy combo version of it, because the Crystron got hit, so you can't play the really combo heavy version of swordsoul anymore. But you can still play the regular regular consistent swordsoul deck, and it's very easy to play. Like, it's outrageously easy to play. Like, it's almost mind-numbing how easy it is to play. It's the same plays over and over. It's the Ecclesia that goes into the Mui, and then the Mui makes the token. You reveal the worm monster. You get a token. You go into the one that negates the level 8, and then you can go into a Baron de Fleur. It's outrageously easy to play. It's the easiest way to make a Baron de Fleur in the entire game. It's extremely consistent. This deck has unbelievable consistency. It burns for 1200 every single time. That's the benefit of the deck. It just has so much consistency. It's the most consistent synchro deck in the game. It's the most consistent fusion deck, and most consistent synchro deck, most consistent tribute deck. Like, these are just, the consistency is why they are there. Next is Symphonic Warriors. I think you should build something else. I don't think this is good. Of all the machine decks that I've shown you, this should be like the absolute final machine deck that you would even want to consider. Next is Tenyi. Tenyi is definitely like, pure Tenyi is definitely like a rogue deck. This is a good card to play in Berserker, is a good card to play in swordsoul, but as a pure deck, Tenyi is probably like a rogue deck. It's a decent deck. It's nothing like to write home about. Unfortunately, it's one of those ones that, like, again, it just loses to Maxi. Maxi is just such a format defining card, but it's just like, if your deck loses to it, you have to pass and then get OTK'd. But yeah, it basically, pure Tenyi is a decent deck. You can like mix it with Giant Ballpark, or you can just play pure Tenyis and then you contribute and summon like basically any floodgate monster you want to, like any of the tribute floodgates, because you basically don't have a normal summon of any kind in the deck. Weather Painters is waiting for a new card, so I'm going to put it probably either in consider building something else for now, or rogue, but it's getting new cards at some point. I don't know when. Thunder Dragons is a tier 3 deck. Everybody plays Forbidden Droplets. Everyone plays Imperm. Everyone plays those cards. So it can be a little rough sometimes to get this thing out and actually have it stick. Time, say, is probably somewhere around Rogue as a pure deck, somewhere around here. Time Thieves is just okay but this is a good Moss monster, but it's a pure deck. It's just kind of rogue. You almost never see them. This deck is probably like a rogue deck that comes out every single time there's some kind of a festival, because it's really annoying and it burns, and it doesn't use the extra deck or any summoning mechanic whatsoever, and it probably will come right out if they don't hit it in the next festival. This is Tindangles. Tindangles is a flip deck, but it's not the best flip deck. The best flip deck in the game is Guru Control. This is probably in consider building something else, and what I would consider is the Guru Control. Tunes are, I'd say, like a very low tier rogue deck. It's, again, if you're in gold, and I have a lot of people that do this, they'll say like, oh yeah, I'm in gold tier and I'm destroying people with tunes. So I'm like, dude, you're in gold tier. Like, I don't even get to be in gold tier. Like, I haven't been in gold tier since like week 1 of the game. So I don't even know what's going on down there. So tunes, if that field spell leaves the field, Toon Kingdom, you basically lose the duel. The Toon Kingdom's kind of crazy. It gives all your tunes protection. You have protection. Toon Kingdom itself has protection because of the Toon bookmark. You can banish it. Toon Blacklisted Soldier is a really strong card. It can attack even in the turn it's summoned. It has a banish effect. Like, there's a lot of positive things. Toon Harpy is really strong. You can activate, special summon it, non-targeting, destroy small track. There's a lot of cool parts about the deck. But again, it's just, if you don't have Toon Kingdom in effect, like, the deck is literally dead. When Yu-Gi-Oh! Builds decks around field spells but doesn't give them a lot of ways to search the field spell or to protect the field spell, it can be a little problematic. I'd say probably Rogue is probably the best. This is, I've already reviewed this up there. It's Earth Machine / Trains. This is Traptrick, is like a rogue deck. It really, like, this deck when it goes first, it literally almost can't lose. Like, it's insane. The deck almost cannot lose when it goes first. When it goes second, there's a lot of problems with this deck when it goes second. Because, again, going first, it sets up Sarah, traps, floodgates. It does its thing. When this deck goes second, those traps aren't so good. But I played against this a couple of days ago, funny enough. As soon as they summon any traptrick, I just pop the traptrick. And then you can't go into Sarah. If you don't go into Sarah, you can't get anything going. So literally, if you stop Sarah, you stop traptrick. Next is, this is, how do I forget these names? This is basically a rock deck. I'm sorry that I forgot this. Tramids. It's Tramids. It's a rock deck that basically relies on 3 different field spells, and every time the field spell goes to the graveyard, you get additional effects. I think it's somewhere in Rogue. If you're going to play a rock deck, you're probably just going to play adamancipators, and that's probably a better option than the Tramids. So I'd say stick to the adamancipators. This is tri-brigades, is probably in like the top half of tier 3, somewhere up here. It's still a very good, like, you see it once in a while. Sometimes you lose, sometimes you win. Like, it's a decent deck. It's nothing too crazy. It's not like when you see Floowandereeze. You see Floowandereeze and they went first. You're like, okay, it's time to scoop it up. Let's go home. This deck you definitely always have a chance, and it's a very fair deck. Trick stars you almost never see. Never see. It's a burn deck. Again, it's one of those decks. Sometimes they set up. Sometimes they go first, and they have all their burn effects, and you're going home. Like, there's nothing you can do. Pack up your stuff. It's a burn deck. They can dodge imperm. They can dodge targeting stuff with Lycoris. It has really, really good. They have really good effects, but again, it's just, I don't remember if anything's even hit in their deck, but if there is, I wouldn't be shocked, because I remember they did hit a lot of those cards. True Dracos is, I'm not putting it in consider building something else. It is better than Monarchs, even though a lot of its cards are gone. I'd say it's probably on the higher end of Rogue tier. Again, if you want to play a tribute based deck, I think you should play Floowandereeze, if I'm being honest. But I think that True Dracos is actually kind of a good deck. Again, it's one of those things where the deck is so different from the rest of the metagame that it can do a lot of really strong stuff against the metagame, because it's so, like, Maxi does nothing against this deck. Floodgates don't matter against this deck, because they literally can just, like, they can play Floodgates and then tribute over them, or they can pop your Floodgates with their spawn trap cards by tributing them and having them get sent to the graveyard. They can play around Skill Drain, play around Macrocosmos. They can play around anything. Like, the deck is really good. It can play around Floodgates, hand traps, everything, and then it plays a bunch of Floodgates itself. It can play Card of Demise, which is like better than a Graceful Charity, because it's a free +3 every single turn. Yeah, really, really strong. This is UAs. I'd say UAs is probably somewhere in the bottom of Rogue. I'd say it's a decent deck, but again, in this meta, it's just a lot. There's just so many better decks than UAs. I'd probably say stick to something else. This is Umbral Horror. It's one of the smallest archetypes ever released. I'm not even going to grade it. I'm just going to put Umbral Horror down here. It's just a tiny archetype. It might be smaller than Great Guardian. Unchained is a pretty decent deck. Unchained, I'd say, is probably like top half of Rogue deck, as long as you don't play against Floowandereeze. If you play against Floowandereeze, you're in for a rough matchup, because number one, if they have D-Shifter, you're kind of screwed. But number two, if they make Ryza and just shuffle back your stuff, you can really be put in a really, really negative loop. Like, anything that shuffles away or bounces your stuff can really be an issue for you. This is the Valkyries. I think Valkyries is like a consider building something else, and I really wouldn't even have a comparable deck. This is a deck I've literally, since the beginning of the game, and I've been playing since day one, I've never seen this deck played once. Like, ever. I've never played against this deck. Ever. I know what it does. It skips your opponent. At least you attack, and then it skips your opponent's turn, and you go back to your own battle phase, and then you attack again. Like, I know what this deck does. I've played it before myself. Like, I've tested it out. But I have never seen anybody play this deck in Master Duel. And that goes actually for a lot of decks down here. Like, I will never see anybody play these decks. It's like, I want to see the numbers on, like, what decks people actually decide to build, because that is definitely not one of them. Next is Vampires. I think Vampires is probably somewhere in, like, Roguish tier. Like, this is pure Vampires. Bottom of Rogue. But again, if you're playing a zombie deck, I would highly recommend building either Zombie World or Eldlich. You're still playing zombies, but you are playing zombies that actually win. This is Roids. Roids is down here. It's a machine deck based on Cyrus from the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. It's a fusion deck that isn't really that strong. by any means. It's kind of it's weaker than Cyber Dragons, weaker than Cyber Darks. It's actually weaker than, where did I put? It's weaker than Ancient Gears. So Ancient Gears probably up here. It's weaker than Ancient Gears. I think it's just it's a worse version of the Ancient Gear deck. Like a lot, like at least Ancient Gears has some broken effects where it's like, oh, this monster's unaffected by this, or your opponent can't activate things in the battle. Like this is such a lackluster deck. It's definitely consider building something else, and something else would definitely be Earth Machines up there. Vendreads is a zombie ritual deck that's probably like around here. One of the better cards in the archetype is actually their Link 2 that can send almost any zombie to the graveyard. That is like a staple in Eldlich and in Zombie World. But as far as the deck goes itself, it's actually kind of decent. Again, it's going to be very difficult for you to go into the higher ranks with this. Like, and when I say higher ranks, I mean like Platinum and Diamond. It might be a little more difficult, but you could definitely get something going. And it's got some new support that's supposed to be coming out. Again, don't know when. Venomanaga is definitely not a deck you should be building. If you want a reptile deck, play the Ogdoadics. And even that's not that good. The Ogdoadics, I don't know where I placed, but somewhere up here, right here. No, that's not it. I placed it somewhere up here. If you're going to play anything, play them. They're right here. But Venomanaga is just not that strong. This is a deck that fell off very hard in both the TCG and in Master Duel after True King of all Calamities got hit. Like, people say, oh, this deck is insane, it's broken. But when True King got hit, this deck fell off, and then the Adventure Package came out, and that made this deck even better. And again, that got hit, so again, this just sort of like fell off again. It like fell off twice. So I'd say it's probably like a tier 3 deck. You definitely have to watch out for it. You have to know how to play against it. You gotta know what the cards do. The trap card's still very, very good. It can put back resources and then pop a card. Like, still very strong cards in the deck. Shen is a very strong card. It makes everything that leaves the field get banished. Like, there's still very strong cards in the archetype, and you still have to respect it and understand what it does. But I don't think it is as strong as it used to be. Volcanics are a bit of a mess. They haven't had support in like 5 million years. Like, since the day they've come out, they've gotten no support. XYZ, all of this nonsense is probably like, consider building something else. And the thing that I would consider is ABCs, which I put somewhere up here. ABCs is just a million times better than XYZ. It's just not even a question. This is Vylons. Vylons, avoid at all costs, build something else. Watts are a thunder-based archetype that is probably somewhere around here. Their archetype is extremely lackluster. Giraffe is decent, but again, I would very much just play Thunder Dragons. Just don't stop it, put it down, play Thunder Dragons. And it sucks that Thunder Dragons and Watts are in the same pack, because sometimes you pull Watts and you're just like, I wish that could have been any other Thunder Dragons. Please, I need a Titan. I don't need this. Windups are decent. It's just like their Link monster is insane, but it's just not good enough because they're missing the more important parts of their archetype. Wind Witches are more of an engine than a deck. Wind Witches are decent with like Harpies. Wind Witches are decent with a variety of stuff, but I'd say Wind Witches are probably somewhere on the bottom of Rogue. As a pure deck, they're just kind of okay. This is Witchcrafters, or another deck that's just, it's such a gimmicky, like, spell-based deck. It's not the worst or most unimpressive concept to a deck. You basically like play like Grass Looks Greener, and again, you can play like Reasoning. Reasoning is very good in this deck because all of them have different levels. Your opponent will never guess the right one. If they do, they should go to the casino that night. But overall, the deck is like bottom of Rogue. It's like very, very gimmicky. This is World Chalice, I'd say, is probably somewhere around here. It's missing its Synchro Monster, which is unfortunate. It's been banned for like... It got banned because of Dragon Link. I'm going to say like 4 years ago. And all of those Dragon Link cards have been banned since then. Like, Argo Pain is banned. LP is banned. Like, I can't even remember all the other ones, but all of the other Dragon Link cards, like the Dragon Link cards that really enabled this are banned now. So honestly, I really don't even see why that monster can't come back. Worms, just avoid this, man. It's like a flip archetype. It's a lot of the hidden arsenal stuff is garbage because they're like all over the place. They're almost like it's almost like a bunch of random cards just got the same archetype slapped up top. Like they're really, really bad. Worms are like flip. Some of them are flip effects, some of them are not. I'd say if you want to play a flip deck again, just play Guru Control and save everybody the grief. This is X Sabers. Their best monster is on the ban list, which is MX Saber Invoker. It's probably like, I haven't ever seen anybody play this in like the modern era of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a very good legacy deck, but I've literally never seen anybody play this. It's got Gotems, which is a decent synchro monster that you can play in Virtual World because they can make level 9 synchros. But other than that, like, you almost never see that deck. Yang Zings, you can mix this with Tenyis, or you can mix this with... Yeah, you can mix this with Tenyis, or you can mix this with... the other deck, which is the swordsoul. But as a pure deck, I think it's like somewhere around Rogue. It's decent, but a lot of the cards miss timing, unfortunately. I don't know why they put this twice, because I just rated Yang Zings. Yosenju is a probably like bottom of Rogue deck. It's a lot like, it's a normal summon deck, and it's similar in a way to Floowandereeze, because all the decks are, they can play a bunch of floodgates, and it's a normal summon deck. You don't special summon in this deck, you just normal summon, because after you normal summon once, you immediately afterwards get to normal summon again. It's almost like if they took some Morgs and Yosenjus and fused them together, you basically get Floowandereeze. But yeah, this is what this is. It's kind of like Floowandereeze, but it doesn't play on your opponent's turn. This is Yubel. It's almost not an archetype. It's got 3 cards. It's just not... It's almost impossible to really run. This is Zephyros. I think Zephyros is a higher Rogue deck. I think, again, Pendulum Magicians are probably better played without the Zephyros. And Endymion is probably better played without the Zephyros. You can play a 60 card like Zephyr deck, but I think it's better just to play this. I'll put this down here because it's just the Zephyr card again. This is Zeus, which I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It's just Zeus. It's not really an archetype. This is tri-brigade. Well, not tri-brigade. This is Zodiac, but most of the time you'll play it with tri-brigades. I think this is... Regular Zodiac is pretty good because you basically just play a few Zodiac names and you go second. You play like 8 million hand traps, and then you just go into Trident and pop a card, and then you go into Zeus and you have like a 6 material Zeus, and that is very tough to play through. That is very good for breaking boards, and that is very tough to play through. But yeah, you just play a bunch of board breakers and hand traps, like 20 hand traps, and the deck is pretty good. You got to respect it. You got to know what you're playing against. Otherwise, you will lose to Zeus. And then we've got Naturias, pure Naturias. I would say consider building something else. They are getting more support right around the corner, but hold off for that. Now for the last few decks, I'm just going to use this. I'm going to say is probably Numerons. So Numerons I would probably put in like tier 3. It's definitely dropped off. Numerons have a very bad matchup against D-Shifter because you literally can't resolve the field spell. Has a very bad matchup against Despia, because Despia floats so much into more and more and more cards. They can float into more than 4 monsters. So if they can float into more than 4 monsters, you need to get some kind of direct attack in. And if they just keep floating and floating and floating, you're not going to be able to get an attack in. On top of that, Mirror Jade, or Ice Jade, I should say. Is it Mirror Jade? Yeah, Mirror Jade, when it leaves the field, it destroys everything during the end phase. So whatever you're going to summon with the remaining monsters is going to be destroyed right afterwards, because once you destroy Mirror Jade, you basically it pops your entire board. So if you go into an Avermax, it's getting popped. If you go into a Saryuja, it's getting popped. Appaloosa, it's they're gonna it activates when it leaves the field, not afterwards. So unfortunately, it can be a little bit tricky to deal with. So I'd say probably it's like in tier 3. It is still a good surprise deck, and it does play around Max E pretty well. The only decks that I haven't gone into is Valiance. I think Valiance is... I'm just going to count this as Valiance and just edit it in afterwards. I'd say Valiance is probably like a rogue deck. It's basically a pendulum deck that... It's a pendulum deck that relies on switching cards columns with like Senate switch and stuff like that. It's kind of like a gimmicky deck. Like it's got some cool like combo potential, but overall I don't think the deck is actually quite that strong. I think it's probably somewhere around Rogue. You'll probably see people trying to play it or trying to use it because they happen to pull it. So you might see it at first, but it's one of those decks that is definitely like it's just going to disappear once the deck goes out of rotation. And then we'll just count this as Scareclaw. I think Scareclaw is pretty good. Scareclaw is the best out of the new cards released in the deck. It's like some of the pendulum cards on Scareclaw. I think Scareclaw is like a highish rogue deck. You can mix it with tri-brigades. It's got some cool like beast warrior things. Its link monster is really, really strong. You got to go read that link monster. If you're not prepared now, you will lose if you do not read that link monster. Yeah, the Scareclaw link monster is actually quite strong. So definitely give that a read. Also, Visa Starfrost is a good card in a variety of different decks. It just sucks that there's so many URs in that archetype. Other than that, the deck is actually quite interesting. So that is everything. The rest of this stuff is just kind of like repeats, so there's no point to even go over most of these. That is the entire tier list. If you think I've got something wrong, or there's something that I should have gone over, or something I'm wrong about, yeah, just let me know in the comment section down below, and thank you for watching. La 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 la.